I don't know.
It's time.
I don't know if it's on or not. Let me just double checkos.
I've got YouTube. Yeah, that's it now. It's up on YouTube now.
Sweet. Okay, well, in that case, welcome everybody to podcast number 6, and topic being songwriting. Trying to stay away from pedals and guitars for 2 minutes and actually worry about this actual process of songwriting. And before we start, I was just doing the usual plugs. In the description, you'll see Max's YouTube channel as well. I implore people to have a look at that and check the description for all our kind of links. Like, subscribe, do all of that to help support the channel and try and keep these podcasts growing. So the topic is songwriting, and we kind of kept it a bit open because it is such a varied subject and it's so subjective as well to many people. And we've got just a few topics. Where do you start? How do you write songs? When is the song finished? And what songs do you like the songwriting of? And what bands do you look towards inspiration? I think this topic is both good for people who listen to music as well as those writing music. And so I'm assuming that the conversation is not just going to go down the guitarist route, which is always the meme. The guitarist usually writes all the stuff and does the lead and then plays the bass on the recording and all that. But I guess I don't think we should be talking about that. More from our own years of slogging away at making tracks and for ourselves, or even trying to get them to be even remotely listened to the broader public. So what I was thinking of doing, if everything is going well, I just want to double check that everything's running smoothly. And then I was thinking of just going round robin, starting with Peter. The reason I want to start with you, Peter, is because you're currently busy with, what is it, an EP with your band?
Yeah, we're going to put out 2 singles first and then follow up with an EP after that, I think. But the 2 singles won't be on the EP, I don't think, at this point.
Okay. So topic number 1, I would just put to you then is like, considering you're currently writing, how you going about it this time, and how did you usually go about it?
This time we had to write a lot of the foundations of the band were done like at maybe the start of the lockdowns. Predominantly with me and the bass player, I would piece stuff together as much as I could and program drums, and send ideas back and forth, and then we started jamming in with the drummer when some of the lockdowns opened up again when we could. But we were about to go, like almost ready to record with the 2 songs, but then we had a drummer change. So the drummer we've got now has brought ideas into it as well. So we've had to go back and revisit and rewrite some parts for the better, I think. Bringing in some of his ideas, and him just coming and learning what we'd already done. It's probably the first time I've got into recording in the last few years, so I've been doing that a lot as well. So pre-production and songwriting and jamming is kind of part of the whole process for me now. So we record everything as we go, and I'll often like program drums, but I'll try and program what the drummer's playing, even if that means videoing it in the studio and then coming home to program what he's playing, so that we can monitor the song's progress at all times. Then try ideas. We've also done a lot of been recording vocals multiple times as well. Trying different layering and different mics and different stuff. So I'm new to all that way of doing things. Jamming in the room as well, but the 2 are going hand in hand now. Whereas previous bands for me, it would have been all just jamming in the room, and then when you recorded the EP, you kind of heard the songs for the first time fully. But this side of it is new to me, and I'm actually quite enjoying it more because you're hearing more what it's going to be like when it's actually recorded. There's no hidden surprises, shall we say.
Yeah. But what about your actual process of of getting the song? Like, how do you come up with the riffs? Do you come up with the riffs first? Do you have an idea in your head and then try make riffs around that? Do you how do you how do you puzzle it together? Do you write a riff and a chorus and then maybe try and find some stuff to go in between? And you said that you had like because of the changes in the lineup and the new ideas, did you all properly collaborate, or
Yeah.
was there some sort of pyramid thing going on? You know, top down.
For the most part, I'll write riffs. I don't really start with a preconceived idea of a structure. Um, 'Cause I've been writing extreme metal for years, and death metal is not really conventional song structure, so it's more like sections. That makes
Yeah.
any sense? So at the start, it's more like just throwing riffs at the wall and hope something sticks, and then building from that. Um, I have got more. This band, more so than my previous ones, maybe is the songwriting structure and is getting a bit more conventional. Like some of the songs, there are more. It's not verse, chorus, but there's definitely things that you would look at that is more chorus like than I would have done before.
Okay.
Um, so in that sense, but it is. I tend to just write from the guitar first. Um, my bass player Ricky, he plays guitar as well, and when he writes, he'll actually tend to put a drum groove playing and try and write riffs to that. I don't really do that. I need to just have just the guitar and worry about that afterwards. I almost never do that, writing the drum beats. Yeah, it's just I quickly, as I come up with riffs though, I will program drums on it. So I record it as I'm going, and I put drums on it, and then that helps me start to see the bigger picture as the drum beats are coming into play. So the structure will go follow that. Um, but it might not necessarily be like here's a full song. It might be here's a minute and a half's worth of music. I'll send that to the guys back and forth, and we'll work on stuff from that. So it's very collaborative. It isn't that I'll write as much as I feel I need to, or as much as just comes out, and then we'll work from that. I don't tend to go too far down and try and make it a complete song and then bring it in. Um, that doesn't happen so often.
When you come to a spot um, where you get the feeling of the song, dare I say, somewhere halfway into creating a song, you kind of know what you want from the song.
Yeah, you kind of get that. You hit that point where you start to see it as a song.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah, that's
do you have them points where you go where you find yourself forcing it into a certain direction, or does it tend to go naturally down a path?
mostly naturally. I can think of one song that we've had to fight a lot. It was initially two songs, and then it got chopped and made one. And even then, we had to fight with it. Normally, I think in years gone by, I probably would have sacked it off a lot sooner than I did, but for some reason, we seem to persist with this one. But for the most part, it's generally quite natural. I don't really, I said because it's pretty much in the extreme end of metal, we're not really having to follow a set formula for a song structure as such.
Yeah.
So it's just whatever way it naturally tends to lead, it tends to lead. Part.
Okay.
I've never really written like conventional, like song structured conventional was like verse chorus. That never really been something. So there's never a preconceived idea. It's more like just writing sections and then trying to get stuff to work together, and then trying to repeat parts to make it sound that it's not just riff salad.
Yeah, yeah.
I've definitely done a lot of that in the past. I'm a lot more conscious of that. And maybe not having parts go on as long and stuff. Yeah, probably less riff salad than I would. I think recordings probably help that as well because being able to record yourself, you can hear back, if something's gone on too long and stuff. So I think that's definitely had a massive impact on how I put stuff together and trimming the fat basically.
Yeah, yeah. Do you ever find yourself forcing a certain thing because you find that I think I'm going to bring this up a few times. We live in this unfortunate echo chamber guitarists and musicians and whatever, and if you're only in that sphere, it seems as if you're making music, you seem to always think of what are they gonna think about it, which you shouldn't, but you kind of do. When I say you, not you, but in general, that you find yourself going, well, maybe this is too simple, or maybe this won't impress the nerds, or I might have to be a little bit more complex with this. Oh my God, it's a 4/4 timing for the third time. Maybe we should do a alternate timing. You know what I mean? Trying to Do you ever find yourself possibly like forcing something to be a little bit more complex than it needs to be, purely for the sake of it?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, definitely, yeah, but not to impress anyone else, just more for me because it's a challenge to play it or something. I can be quite like that
Keep it
sometimes.
interesting for yourself as well, right? So like, so
Yeah,
you're challenging.
Yeah. Sometimes I find Ricky, the bass player, he's very good at like snapping me out of that. A lot of the times, to the point now where he's made me more conscious of it. Definitely, when I started working with him, there was times where it's like you're just doing that just for the sake of it. It doesn't really add anything. So I think that's one big thing I've learned off Ricky is to not force that. Like I can still make it interesting, but out like it doesn't have to be the most complicated part. It can be just for that bar if it doesn't fit the context. So I've got more aware of that. But if I wasn't aware of it, he'd tell me pretty soon anyway. And so I don't really spin those wheels as much as I typically would have in the past.
The benefit of having more ears, that you trust.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. There's even been times I can think of one or two cases where like I don't show him stuff in the practice studio. We do it via WhatsApp video. I'll do video playthroughs and Ricky will work on he'll learn the guitar parts from that and then work his bass from that. And there's been a couple of times where we've worked in the studio and I'm like, he'll show me what he's playing on the bass. And then I've made the guitar more like that, which ended up being simpler, but it fitted the part better and then the vocal slotted in better. Rather than playing too many of the notes just for the sake of it.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
He's actually been great for that. Ricky can play drums as well. He's a really good drummer as well. So I think he sees the song from that side of it. The bass and the drums. Or than I would say, he's very good at seeing how everything should fit together. Maybe not even necessarily better than me, but certainly much quicker than me. And he'll snap me out of that kind of overcomplicating things just for the sake of it. But I have become more aware of it now since I've been working with him. Maybe I don't want to give him the satisfaction of pointing it out.
Too late now. Let's take it all back. What about you, Max?
Well, I think my approach has always been really uncollaborative. I think so. I started writing when I was, seriously writing when I was about sort of 14, 15. And it was, I only really started writing songs when I bought a cassette 8-track, probably in like 95, I want to say, something like that. And that's when I started, because I wasn't interested in like, just writing songs with some chords and then singing over them or whatever, and then writing that down on a piece of paper, and then that's the song kind of thing. I wanted to produce like fully finished stuff, and so the challenge initially, especially in the mid-90s, was figuring out ways to get like drums on the recording and all that kind of stuff, because I didn't have a drum kit. So that's kind of how I taught myself to produce, so that I could teach myself to write songs, basically, and so I could write my own songs. So I've kind of been, so my approach to writing songs has always been, I write the song as I'm making, I guess, what you'd think of as the demo, but more often than not, that's what ends up getting put out anyway, because I don't really do well with like sketching and then improving on that. I kind of tend to try and produce the finished version. I think probably just through circumstance, I haven't really worked much with, like, in bands with people who are also songwriters, I think probably, in all the years I've been in bands, I think, maybe sort of, I don't think I've ever been in a band where someone else has like, well, no, that's not true. I did when I first came back to England. I joined a band, but it was someone else's band, and I was just singing in that band, and they had a bunch of songs, and that didn't last long because it wasn't really. It was like like an indie band, and I wasn't really into it. I was only filling in because I didn't know anyone, and I just wanted to be in a band. But anyway, as soon as I started forming my own bands, it became a thing where just I'd write 99% of the music and all the lyrics and everything. So I taught myself to play drums so I could. I mean, I don't play drums in my recording, but just so I could credibly write the drums. So whenever I'm writing drums, I'm writing playable drums, so that if I give them to a drummer, it's something the drummer could plausibly play. You know, I've been a bass player in bands as well, so that's fine for me. Obviously, I'm a guitar player and I'm the singer as well, so that works too. So basically, I'm sort of kind of I one man band it most of the time. That sort of, so yeah, I have a very, very production based approach to writing music. In terms of how that kind of comes together, it's like, I think there's probably 2 or 3 different methods that I have for writing songs. I think the first method is probably what I'd describe as being like the accidental method, where you have an idea while you're taking a shower or walking the dogs or whatever, something just lands in your head. You wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, you've had, this got a melody stuck in your head or whatever, and it's sort of, and then you kind of go in the studio and you sit down, and then 2 hours later you've got a finished song that just kind of fell out of your brain, and you don't really even know how that happens. Then the second way I think of writing music I have is when I set out to steal. When I hear something that I really want to emulate, and I have an idea of how, well, actually, it might be like if I hear a song that I really like, but I think that song would be better if it did this. And so based on that, I sort of write a song from that point where it left off, and I write the rest of it, as it were, and the sort of the song that comes out of it is what I heard that song being, but it isn't. And then I think the third type of writing that I do is I think what you alluded to, Peter, is kind of the idea of sort of Legoing a song together, and that's probably more common. Sort of, I've been in heavier bands than I'm in now. Not that the band I'm in isn't heavy, but I've been in sort of probably sort of, I mean, we're talking probably mid-career Metallica levels of heavy at most anyway, but sometimes for the sake of producing material, you get a hat full of riffs essentially, and you just pull them out and you try and kind of connect them all together. And once you have 4 minutes worth of that kind of stuff, those tend to be my least favorite types of song to write, because they're generally kind of feel like they're less thematically cohesive. I like when I start writing a song and I have an idea of how the whole thing is going to be and how the vibe it's going to have and the theme it's going to have, and that's when kind of the creative juices really start flowing. When I just have an idea or a feeling about the song and I know how it's going to turn out, and then I find it easier to write the lyrics for that. I find it easier to come up with melodies. I find it easier to kind of write the guitar solo. Often those songs also tend to be quite simple. Like usually it's just the riffs are a lot simpler and a lot more direct. The chord progressions are a lot simpler and a lot more direct, just because I feel like when you got a stronger idea, the music can kind of speak for itself a little bit clearer. When it is a case of, where I've got this riff and I've got this riff and I've got this riff, and they do kind of go together, so I've got to figure out a way to kind of mechanically assemble them, that kind of thing. I find that's a little bit heavier going. Not that those songs can't turn out to be good as well in their own right, but I think I just have less warm feelings about them because they feel less organic, if you see what I'm saying.
Do you start off with a melody for a vocal pattern in your head, and then you build the chords around that, or do you start with the guitar first?
No, I'm not sure if I've ever written anything vocally first. I don't think. I think vocals come dead last, probably 99% of the time. I honestly can't remember a time where I've written a song that had even a vocal melody, let alone a lyric to start with. I think it's always been some kind of interaction between the guitar, like the guitar and a rhythm or something like that. You know, drum pattern and a guitar thing that goes over it, or just a guitar thing on its own, maybe a melodic thing, so like a guitar line with a melodic line over it or something like that. That might be where the idea comes from. And then I'll build up from there. But the vocals, I think my approach to writing vocals and lyrics is kind of like it's the Paul McCartney school of recording bass, where he'd always wait until most of the song was done to cut his bass part so he could write the most interesting bass line he could. I always feel like if you start off with my suspicion is that, I'm not saying this is for, I'm just in my case, if I started off with a vocal line or like a set of lyrics or whatever, then I'd probably end up crippling the song by trying to fit it into that so I can express the vocal the way it kind of started out. Whereas I feel like if I write, it's this weird thing. What I do is I write all the music and then I write the lyrics and I record the lyrics and then I'll listen to the song and then maybe 6 months later I'll realize what the song means. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like I just the process of kind of finding lyrics that fit into the meter and the words sound kind of cool and they scan and everything like that. And then the themes that emerge from that aren't immediately clear, but later on down the road you'll go, oh, that's what that song was about actually. That's for me. But I kind of like leaving this. I as much as everything I do is very, very structured, I try to kind of keep those things. Try to do things that way in such a way that they remain as organic as possible within the confines of how I write.
Yeah, I don't do vocals at all, so it's never really a thing that's on my radar much. And because of how heavy we are, it's kind of not as big an overall part of the song.
So in your band, are the vocals all, I guess, growling or screaming or what?
In previous bands, it was really death metal. This is a little less so. It's coherent enough, like more like maybe hardcore, but it's still heavy. Yeah. But I've been in bands where the vocals was like the very last thing you do when the whole song was done. This vocalist I have now, Ross, he likes to be in early when we're piecing stuff together, because he's working on vocal patterns as we're playing the riffs. So sometimes he'll dictate what might end up becoming a chorus, even if I wasn't hearing it that way initially.
Yeah.
So that approach has been a bit different as well. Normally it was the vocals was always the very last thing once everything was structured, because you had to put vocals on it for the most part.
Yeah.
But I was just curious to see what your process was, because you sing as well. But obviously you're trying to wear more hats the whole way through than I typically would.
Yeah, and I would say the vocals also are very, very arranged melodically, my stuff. Like, I don't write songs that don't have like quite elaborate vocal harmony parts in them. So I tend to view the vocal as kind of part of the melodic orchestration as well as, so they're very arranged in that sense. So that they're not like a Jimi Hendrix vocal, which is just kind of feels very loose and kind of, sits over the top of it. It's like Alice in Chains, if you see what I mean. It's like, it's all very much part of the melody and rhythm of the song. And they can drive the melodic changes of the song as well. So it's not just left to the instruments to provide that. So you're not just getting like a melody line over a kind of a chord structure. It's like everything kind of has that interplay. So yeah, I think the vocals tend to kind of round out the song in that sense. They're very integrated into all the other instrumentation.
Yeah. See, vocal stuff's something we've been experimenting with more as well, like layering something.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we're ourselves now, we can try all these things and experiment, whereas maybe I wasn't in a position to do that before. Yeah, it's amazing the modern technology we have. It's so easily available for demoing and writing now. It's became like such a vital part of the process.
Yes.
And you can iron out everything before you do it. Like I'm probably going to be quad tracking guitar as well, which isn't something I've done previously. If you're paying for it, it's obviously going to cost you a lot more for paying for studio time. But even on the demos now, right even when I'm writing stuff, I'm starting the quad track all the time so that I get so used to it. When I have to do it for
Yeah.
real, it'll just be normal. It won't suddenly feel like I've all of a sudden got twice the workload.
Yeah. But it's funny actually because that's an approach. I mean, I've always kind of done. You know, basically when I started out recording to tape and I had an 8-track, I'd have 3 guitar tracks, and usually if I was recording some kind of heavy metal thing, I'd have the stereo rhythm guitar tracks and then maybe a lead track in the middle. And then obviously as I've got like unlimited multi-tracking on computers, it's like I have in the past like quad tracked guitars and everything, and you kind of do that thing where it's like, you know, you've got the stereo thing for the impact obviously, and then you have like maybe a texture guitar, and then maybe like a guitar that's more bassy and trebly or whatever, and that kind of thing. I'm actually sort of I'm trying to move away from that more now as well, because it's like it's one thing that I feel like it I for a long time, I think the recordings I actually started to feel that in the last album that we recorded, that it turned into a little bit of a conveyor belt, because it was just the same thing on the same production approach on every song, where it's like if you go into a big loud riff type thing, then you get your quad track guitars. And, you know, I mean, we did it properly. You know, we had we had blends of amps and all that kind of stuff, and we used different guitars to get different textures, and it came out well and everything like that. But I felt like it got away from I like to think of production as being part of the creative aspect of songwriting. So I don't view it as a distinct thing. I think like, you know, the way you produce a song can affect the way you write it, the way it ends up sounding.
Yeah,
I think like the choice.
100%.
Yeah.
But it actually starts right at the beginning of the production process.
Yeah.
It's not just the mixing. And sorry to butt in there, but I think it's really important to, before I forget it, I think that the production side of things starts right at the beginning. The choices that you make, it's not just a case of tracking everything and then trying to hit that production with the mix. There's a lot that goes into that to make that the way that you wanted it.
Yeah. I think when you're dealing with things like extreme metal, because you have that very desirable kind of wall of sound thing going on, it makes sense to have these kind of very thick layered guitars going on, you know, and then the trick becomes to retain the kind of clarity and aggressiveness while also kind of having a lot going on. And I've always thought like metal is the hardest genre of music to mix because of that, because you've got so much going on, like a huge range of frequencies. You know,
All
if you're
in the
mixing a
same
blues
place.
trio, you can just push up some faders and go for a cup of coffee. But like if you're mixing metal, it's just so intense. It's so difficult. Everything's competing. Everything. The drums have to be intense, and the guitars have to be intense, and the bass has to be intense, and the vocals have to be intense, and everything has to be like full on all the time. And it's so hard to get that balance and still retain a sound that isn't unpleasant to listen to, because it's like too full on, too hardcore. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's like I've mixed probably the genre I've mixed the most is heavy metal, and I always find it the most challenging. Everything else is a piece of cake when compared to that. Give me like an acoustic band anytime, because then it's just so easy to do. Because then you can just worry about what things sound like. You don't have to worry about like clashing dynamics. You know, that's the biggest challenge. But I think that can affect the songwriting as well, because I think it was I can't remember who it was. It might have been Opeth. I'm not sure. But there was like an album that was like the mix came out being like a total departure from what you're going. Actually, no, a really good example is a band called Pain of Salvation, who had been a fairly straight up kind of sort of proggy kind of metal band. They're a Scandinavian band. And right up until they came out with a couple of records that were very, very, very good. They were called Road Salt 1 and Road Salt 2. And they radically changed the production methods on that album, and they went to, I don't know how they recorded it, but it sounds very organic and very kind of, it might have been recorded to tape, but it's very rootsy sounding, very kind of natural saturation, all that kind of stuff. Everything's a little bit smaller, everything's a little bit less kind of in your face. But it sounds amazing. It sounds really detailed, and everything's very clear, and you can hear everything, but it still has that really kind of analog warmth to it. And I think they got a lot of stick for it because it wasn't like this blaring kind of riff metal festival kind of thing. But I think that kind of that decision that they made to have that, it kind of really changed the way the songs work, and it really kind of privileged their kind of more melodic ideas, and I think the songs are probably better off for it. Again, I'm not saying that's always the case. There are a lot of albums that I love that are just like absolute brutality from wall to wall. But it's like, I think it, you know, that's part of the choice you make, isn't it, when you're going into a project like that?
Yeah. So you guys are how do I put this? I would say I think we're all different. From what I hear. I initially started playing guitar kind of like from what you said earlier there, Max. Like, I used to hear things and I wanted it either to carry on, or I wanted the guitar sound to be slightly different, or I wanted just an extra little piece of added thing to a riff. And that was basically my reason for picking up a guitar, to see if I could do it. And for the first 10 years, I probably did nothing but play easy grunge stuff, and I think I'm still in that mode to a big degree. Maybe that's why I like the stoner stuff so much at the moment, or the kind of doom stuff, because it's there's mood behind it, and it's not too complex, and it's easy to understand. And what I mean by that is both from playing and from listening to it. I don't know, man. I used to fight technology all the time when I started writing and trying to record stuff myself. And it was about in 2001, when, you know, the kind of being able to do things at home with the computer that you had and the doors that you had, and it was still a bit difficult, not because the technology couldn't do it, but because your environment wasn't easy to deal with. You didn't have good amps, you didn't have easy drummer, stuff like that. So it was a bit more complicated. So I did a lot of shit stuff during that time, but I had to do it. I just kept trying to do things, and I did a lot of stuff myself, and I always ended up being the one who wrote the riffs, and then, you know, try to get a band together and hope it goes somewhere, and then, you know, one member leaves, another one comes in, and he can't do it properly, so you get pissed off, and then before you know it, you just leave it all. But in the last, I would say, probably 6 or 7 years, I've been taking it a bit more seriously, and again, it's been a case of just doing it myself until I started getting some guys together again, and then obviously COVID hit, and I had a few ideas of what to do. So I'm gonna go forward and backwards. What we did now was you know, you come into the jam space, you've got, you know, a couple of riffs, then you start jamming them, and you see where it goes. And if it catches on, and if the people enjoy playing, and if everybody's kind of in agreement, you kind of keep working at it, and then maybe next week you come with another part that might fit, or somebody comes up with an idea, or the drummer plays something that you didn't really have in mind, but it's actually more suitable, and, you know, the path takes that. So this little 6-track thing that we're nearly finished with, it's not as polished as some of the stuff should be, but I think the writing part is some of the better stuff that's ever been done, in my opinion, from my side of things. And a lot of it had to do with, I suppose, that it was such an easy environment between the three of us. Like, you could say what you want, you could do what you want, you could suggest what you want, and anybody could do that, and things just kind of just worked out basically. So when we started to record, we did the drums first, and then we it's been quite a while since the drums been recorded, and we go backwards and forwards, putting stuff on and then going, okay, we need to maybe redo this, that, and the other. So it's been much more collaborative. And the reason I mentioned that is because it's been completely different from the way I did the last pretty much everything that's on Spotify at the moment. That it feels more complete in a sense that you feel like there was a proper collaboration that happened, that the not just what people play, but also the excuse me, the tones that we selected for the different instruments was all the people that play that instrument's choice. But luckily it's the right choice for the songs, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Whereas all the stuff up to then, it was all me here. What you see here is literally everything was done here. And it's not the right environment. I mean, it's a house. It's kids and dogs and neighbors and everything. But you just...
Sorry, can I just cut in there? Because I think it's like... I think the right environment's a really important thing. For like creativity, because I remember I think it was Kurt Vonnegut, who wrote Slaughterhouse-5, who said that well, basically he wrote all of his books like at the kitchen table with his wife, like cooking and banging pots and his kids running around and everything like that. If you go on any like writer's workshop type thing or like writer's advice or whatever, the first thing they'll say literally is you have to hole yourself up in a quiet room and eliminate all distractions and all that kind of stuff. And yet Kurt Vonnegut wrote these absolute classics, in total chaos. And I think there's something to be said for like your creativity being stimulated by limitations. And I think sometimes that limitation can be the fact that you're not working in like an optimal space. And I often think about like, when rock stars get like really huge, and so they've written like their classic albums, their first two albums, and they've become massive and everything. They've done their world tours and everything. And so then they become really wealthy and they build themselves a mansion, or they buy a massive mansion and they build themselves a state-of-the-art recording studio in the basement. And so they have access to this perfect environment for creating recordings and writing and all that kind of stuff. And they have access to it 24/7. And if they have some knowledge, maybe they have a tame engineer that can come and help them, or maybe they just know how to do it themselves. And then everything they produce after that's absolute garbage.
Yeah, but that's not the reason. The reason is usually after the first two albums, they all go through rehab and they're sober and all that. That's
true, but I think there is something to be said for that kind of option paralysis
sure.
Of just having created yourself having gone, okay, I think sometimes I think like some of the best songs I've written were when I was in a terrible relationship with my ex, and I was working on like a piece of shit PC on like some crappy little desk in some back room, and I didn't even have a proper interface. I just had an audio adapter so I could plug a guitar into the back of a computer, and I was just going in through the audio input, and I didn't have any plugins and I didn't have anything, and it was just like everything sounded like shit and I hated it and everything like that. But sometimes I feel like the songs that came out of that might have been like some of the more inspired ones, because I was buying, not always, in fact probably not even most of the time, but sometimes I think that can be conducive a little bit, kind of.
I would agree to a very big degree on that, and you kind of feel like the same kind of ideas happened in my past, where a lot of some songs that are still hanging about, I've really got this idea of trying to bring them back that I recorded like literally years ago in the shittiest way, but I think the songs themselves were actually strong, like the melodies and the lyrics, and also the whole concept behind them. So there is this thing in the back of my head. There's probably 20 things that I would like to redo, and actually bring out, because they've never been brought out. But the problem with me in a weird way is that I can come up with 20 riffs in half an hour. That's not a problem. The riffs are never a problem. The problem is, or the thing that I work on is that there's always something in my head that I'm chasing. It's either a tone or an atmosphere, a kind of feeling or mood, or where is this supposed to go to, right? And so a lot of time the effort is not the riffs, but it is the transitions, that they are not just fitting, but that they take the listener from here to there and back again. That it's a bit of a journey for stuff, for the listener to go to. And I feel like the riffs don't do all of that work. Actually, the most of that work is actually done by the bass and the drums in a big way. So that was another thing that I was trying to do in this band that we're now, because I didn't want it to be a guitar based kind of thing. It's like, okay, it's kind of doomy, grungy, stonery, metally stuff, which is guitar based, but actually I wanted it to be mainly driven by the bass and the drums. Not overcomplicated or anything, but that they play, like in the mix at least, a very definitive role. It's not just a backup for, some egotistical guitarist or something, which is so often seems like to be the case. So it ended up being quite, this stuff is sounding really, really different. But within all that, I think that the overall sound, now that we have like a good demo of it going, that we've been dissecting a bit, I think that I'm really happy with the way it all turned out. I think it turned out exactly the way we all kind of envisioned, or where we wanted it to be. The stuff in the past was different, like during lockdown and afterwards was when I basically, well, actually the end of 2019, I put the first 8-track album out. And that was actually started with these guys. We had a studio down in town and everything, and we had 4 tracks down, and we managed to record 4 drums for 4 tracks. One of the drum tracks we couldn't use, but I wanted to have 8 tracks. I didn't just want an EP or something. So I wrote the other 4 things, and I finished them, and I used, drum programming and all sorts of stuff. But I used 3 of the recorded drum tracks. And although I was happy with it, it's not the same as now. And then after that, everything was just done in the house. So you come up with the riff, you know exactly what drums you want. You can go in, you can find all the little drum loops. You can then amend them to exactly the way you want. And you can absolutely go into every detail. You've got this absolute control over everything in your DAW, from drums to bass to the tones to everything. And so I was kind of happy with the way it all turned out. But having done this now properly with the band, it just feels so much better and makes so much more sense.
Find it more rewarding, and you feel that their inputs made the song fresher for you. There's stuff in it that you wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah, well, that absolutely. But it's also, it feels nice to have that weird bond between a couple of people.
Yeah.
That you're on the same page. And you achieved something together without arguments and, tempers flaring or anything. It was all chill. It was all easygoing, and everybody got done and liked what's happening. And there's a lot of times when you feel like everything rests on your shoulders, when in this case it doesn't. You feel like, I'll give you an example, right? So in the jam room, I can't always hear exactly what the bassist is doing. There's nothing obvious that you think, oh, I wish he would play something else, but you don't. And partly because there's nothing actually happening wrong, but you never really know exactly what they're playing, because I'm concentrating so much because I'm doing like looping and all sorts of stuff. So when it came to the recording, once we had the drums recorded, because I do drums first and then guitar and then bass, and then depending on what the bass does, I might redo some of the guitar stuff. so that they work together a bit better. So we did two bass tracks, and it sounded so good. It wasn't because I wanted to do the bass for the person. I just wanted to hear the stuff with the bass. So I quickly recorded bass for all of them. But then when he came back to do the bass, he obviously put his parts that he usually plays. And a lot of the parts were completely different from what I played or would have thought to play. But it suited it so much better. It just worked better, you know. So there's a lot of that to be said for it to be a more collaborative. So the way I see it is like, you feel so much more in control when you're doing everything yourself, and you know that everything is done exactly the way that you want it. But that doesn't mean it's more fun or actually makes a better product at the end of the day.
I agree with that.
Especially if you have the right people.
Our last album, our only album, when we did it, it's like I could have done it all by myself. And I think that's always been a bit of the tension for me, because it's like the question of, you know, do I even need to be in a band? Because I can record fully fledged, fully produced music myself and just put it out if I want to. And therefore, it's like, is the question of, you know, in theory, you only need a band if you want to play shows, right? But when it came to actually recording this album, I insisted that everyone should play their parts, even if they were just playing the parts the way that I had written them. So we had demos that I'd worked up myself, like played everything on the demos. And the drummer re-recorded the drum parts, like just with the, you know, they're still superior drummer, but it's like he recorded them on an electronic drum kit. And then the bass player came in and retracked all of the bass. And again, he was playing substantially the bass in the way that I had written it. And the guitar player came in and tracked, you know, I mean, we divvied up the guitar parts and we played our own parts and everything. And I even had them, because it's like I've been working very hard to get them to sing as well. And none of these three guys are singers, but like they can sing in key, but they don't think of themselves as singers or whatever. But it became important to have their vocals on the record as well. And I think once we were done, we had an album that, although it's, you know, substantially in its composition was basically what I had written, the fact that they had all played their parts on it just made it feel more legitimate to me, because it wasn't like some vanity project. It was like a band, you know, you were hearing four guys playing together, you know, and that was the finished product. And like I say, it probably not that different from what it would have been had I just done it myself, but it was important to get the other guys to play on it. And I think that had its own kind of value, you know.
There was a situation. So I've been in a few bands, as you mentioned before, being in a band where you just rock up and do your thing. Like I played bass for a punk band for a while. That was the easiest gig under the sun, right? You rock up, you just plug the bass straight into an amp, and you just play your parts, and you go home. And that was actually, I actually really enjoyed it. Although fair enough, I changed all the bass parts and they liked it. But the point is, like, that was it. That creatively, that was the absolute most that you contributed, right? But then we were in another band with some of the same guys, and we recorded 8 songs, and we went into the studio, and drums were recorded, and this and that and the other, and we were all happy with it. And then the main dude went in after the fact, without telling us, and added more and more guitar. Right? Fucking hell. You know, it was like, at the very least, say, well, you know what, I think I want the guitars to be more heavy or fuller or double tracked or whatever. Let's go in another day. But that didn't happen. It was just like, oh, by the way, I added some more guitar shit to it. That's a situation I don't want to put anybody in that's in the band with me. You know, where you go.
That happens a lot, though, doesn't it? Like professionally, because I remember talking to Phil X, back when he was just some guy. You know, and I mean, he was a session player at the time, but this was back in the time when he was doing like video demos for Fretted Americana, and he was demoing all of those. This is the early days of YouTube, and he was demoing all of those vintage guitars for this shop in California. And he was at the time, he was doing sessions, and he was telling me about like how the band Daughtry, who had won American Idol or some shit like that, and they were making their first record. And whoever was producing it just basically hired Phil X to come in and recut all of their guitars.
Yeah.
He just went in, just every single guitar, he just played it again because they just weren't good enough.
Yeah, but hold on.
And it's
like there is a difference though. Like if it's a professional band and you bring in session musicians, and then that session musician gets paid, and you don't like what he's done, or you add some stuff, fine. But this is different, right? If a band wants to treat you like that, then they can pay your fucking session rates.
I'm not saying what this guy did is right. I think it's horseshit. I think it sounds awful. I'm just saying it's like it's quite a common. You hear stories about it all the time that people find that they think their parts have been changed and shit. You know.
But all
do any of you hear Mustaine trying to explain why Marty Friedman left Megadeth?
No, go on.
It was a song that we were going to release to the radio. It was back when solos weren't cool, so Marty had a solo on it, and the label decided they needed to shorten it or cut it, or get Dave to re-record another solo. And apparently he goes, yeah, okay, but he said to the management, yeah, okay, but you guys have to tell Marty. And as if Mustaine wasn't capable of telling him himself. So anyway, Mustaine retracked a solo that was simpler and shorter so they could release the song. And apparently when the album was mixed and the whole band was in the studio listening back to the final mix, this song is playing and it gets to the point where Friedman's expecting his solo to come in and then doesn't hear it. And Mustaine goes, and I knew right then there, the management didn't tell him. And he said, I knew in that moment he was going to leave, and apparently left. Of course, Megadeth have different management now. So he's not blaming his current management. But like, I think as being the band leader, he would have had the balls to tell him himself, wouldn't you?
Well, you said band leader. I think that was the situation I was trying to get away from this time. Although I was probably the one organizing most and, you know, coming up with all the riffs and stuff, I didn't want that to be the dynamic. You know, the guitarist being the band leader, the usual. I mean, you see, that's pretty much how everything plays out. Guitarist comes, gets a few guys together, has 10 riffs, writes the songs. I didn't really want that dynamic this time.
Is that something you can choose though? Is that really a choice? Because it's something that I've tried before, and I keep trying it in every band that I form, because I always form the band, and then it's like, even if it's like me and one other guy, and it's like our idea, and we get the guys together and everything like that, and I always spend like a really sort of awkward 6 months kind of trying to say like, okay, look, there's no leader here, it's a democracy, and you guys can bring your ideas in, and everyone has a say, and all this kind of stuff. And what I always find, like, without fail, is that actually what it is 3 other guys that really just want to stand around and wait to be told what to do. Well, you know, and that's no disrespect to them, but it's like it's for some reason in the situations that I've been in, it's always ended up being a dynamic where it needs to be one guy who basically says, okay, well, I have a vision for what this needs to be, and so I'm just going to lay it out, and you guys can go yes or no. And everyone is free to bring their own stuff in. It's not prescriptive, but at the same time, it just ends up being the case that they don't.
I think,
you know.
Yeah, I think it's a natural dynamic, unfortunately, because it tends to be the people that play guitar are also the ones that are the most keen to get shit done, and are the ones who mess with shit more. Drummers have the problem that they don't have the accessibility to their instruments like a guitarist does, so they don't necessarily have, you know, the time and the space and the environment to just go and bang out stuff as they feel willy-nilly like we can. I think there are certain reasons why that happens, for sure. But you know, it's exactly that thing that needs to be solved for it to be a fluid kind of band dynamic. And I think one of the things that I noticed over time as I got older, looking at how many bands I've been in and how none of them lasted, and how I think that most of the ones that I was in actually had a potential to get to a certain level from the stuff that we actually produced. That I'm not talking about fame and fortune, but a good 5 years gigging, maybe an album or two, some sort of recognition. But it always fails because people leave, or other things in their life is more important, or they lose interest, or they don't like the music. It doesn't matter what it is, but the band itself is the thing that splits up. And if you look at the bands that have really made it for a long time, it's either been the ones where the band are like a unit and they've always stayed a unit, or it's a case where you have this main guy who pays all the bills and does all the ideas and does all the driving, and he doesn't care who's playing guitar next or drums next. He just keeps this project, dare I say, going.
Like Dave Mustaine.
Like Dave Mustaine.
Yeah.
And if you look at let's take Rammstein as an example. I mean, how the fuck do they do it? Being so many people for so many years, being such a it must be part of their Stasi background, under the conditions they lived when they were teenagers, that they are probably so happy that they can actually have this life, doing
playing the same two riffs over and over again.
Well, look, man,
there's a lot to be said for being easily pleased, isn't there? It's like they're not a band that seeks evolution. Really. I mean, that's changed a little bit.
The pyrotechnics has evolved. That's it.
Hold on. I'm going to defend them, and I'll tell you why. I think the biggest problem with Rammstein is obviously their music is fairly easy, simple, kind of born out of the industrial music scene from the, I would say, mid to late 90s. But playing that music well is also a feat. It's not something that everybody can do. But the real missing piece of Rammstein is not their big shows and all that. The biggest problem that people don't understand about them is because they don't understand German. Their concepts and their lyrics are fucking solid. I mean, solid. And the way that the lyrics are written are incredibly clever. And it's not something that if you just translate it into English and went, okay, this is the meaning, that's really interesting, la la la. It's actually the way that they use German as a language. That is the part that I always feel they're terribly underrated. Because
it suits the music. It suits the music. You don't even have to know what they're singing for the language to fit with the overall package.
But if you do, then there's a whole other dimension that opens up, because it's like, so my German isn't great, but I am actually half German. But so my mother was fluent in my mother was German, and so she explained a lot of the lyrics to me. I had some German friends, and they were all sort of big into Rammstein and stuff. And it's a obviously Rammstein's music is hugely atmospheric. That's one of the aspects of it. It creates an atmosphere, but the understanding the lyrics and the themes that they deal with just totally adds to that. It's true. It really kind of
that's also
it's added value.
That's also why I don't perceive their pyrotechnics and their massively elaborate videos as being something to kind of mask their basic musical production or writing. Because if you understand the lyrics and you understand the concept of the albums and of the songs, then you understand the videos better and why they actually did what they did. Deutschland, that song for me is an incredibly deep song, actually, for anybody to produce or write, because of that's the other thing that I appreciate about them, is like they're so open about their emotions or feelings or whatever you want to call it. Like for somebody to say the things that they did about their own country is such an inquisitive kind of like study into their own country, its history, and all of that stuff, without being shy about it. Or so no, I'll defend them on that. I mean, obviously, we could probably play their riffs. I mean, I did the Deutschland cover because I had to. I was actually trying to demo a pedal, but the point is, it took me 5 minutes to learn the song, and it was done. Fair enough.
Are you saying that Germany has a controversial history?
about as controversial as England, yeah.
Probably not for as long though.
I was gonna say that, and then I thought I better not say it, because it feels like because when you say that, you feel like you're taking away from what they did. But yes, we only did it for 30 years. England did it for 300. But yeah, never mind.
30 years, if that, to be honest,
But anyway.
But no, you're absolutely right, and I think I mean, I've loved Rammstein since the mid-90s. I think I first heard them when they had those songs on the Lost Highway soundtrack.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
and it was Rammstein and another song. And I went to see them in Cardiff a couple of months ago, and it was a mind-blowing show. But I think one of the qualities of Rammstein as a band is that they do manage to retain this kind of within a genre that often tends towards over complexity. I think that they're probably one of the, I mean, none of them, I don't think any of them would describe themselves as being technically proficient.
Virtuosos, yeah.
But their music, it's the fact that they managed to retain this really direct simplicity, and yet it's never kind of repetitive or boring. It's always just very kind of direct and kind of, inventive. And I feel like, bands like even Metallica hasn't really managed to kind of nail that down. They're one of very few bands that manage to kind of keep doing very similar things, but always in a sufficiently different way. That keeps it fresh and interesting while also being quite simple. And I think that's a really clever thing to achieve.
Well, I want to add, and I'm making a massive assumption here. I'm happy to be blasted out of the atmosphere for this one. But I think the other problem with Rammstein is that people don't listen to the whole album. They definitely have their big hits, and I'm making an assumption here that people don't necessarily listen to the whole album. The last two albums didn't really grip me as much, but three of them, the kind of 2006 to about 2012, I think was their three best albums, and every single song.
Mutter and Rosenrot and Herzeleid, was it? Or was that? No, Herzeleid was earlier, wasn't it?
Mind.
What was the other one?
I think they were the strongest. The last albums, I didn't enjoy listening to them as much as the others, but
the newest one I found really boring. I wouldn't be a big fan anyway, but I tried listening to the last one. It was just
the last one. There's a few stuff on there which I kind of like, but it wasn't like the whole one. I'm just actually. I can't believe we're going down this route, but here we are. So Reise, Rosenrot, and Liebe ist für alle. I think those were lyrically and musically probably where they were at their best. But anyway, we were talking about songwriting, but I think in that there's also a lot to be learned. That sometimes, this is why I asked Peter earlier about if you ever find yourself kind of forcing to be more complex than you need to be, for the sake of the nerds.
Not so much anymore, but yeah.
Because there is obviously a tendency, and I think a lot of it has been exasperated by YouTube and all the forums of the early 2000s, that we have to be extremely good and clever about everything instead of focusing on, when I play this live, are the people going to be jumping? Are they going to be enjoying themselves? Are they going to
Yeah, who'd
listen
have
to
thought
this?
the prog would become such a huge force in kind of like, in rock and roll. It's like every other big kind of guitar YouTuber is some massive, prog musician, playing insanely complicated, really melodically complex kind of guitar parts. And it's
Yeah.
just like, you know, to me, I listen to oh, what are they called? That young band, you know,
P- p- p-
um,
Polyph- poly-
Olivia. Yeah, thank
Polyphia.
you. They're basically they're like jazz hip hop, but with guitars, right? And it's like they're just massively successful. And it's such a strange thing. It's like there's no vocals. I think they have guest vocals on some songs or whatever, but mainly it's just this kind of very, very complicated, very distinctive guitar playing.
Well, I'm
And
not going.
actually,
Yeah.
sorry, go on.
Well, I'm not going to fault people like that on their skill, but
Yeah.
I will say this. My fear is that how big the guitar community is on YouTube, which has to be massive, because if you've got all these big YouTubers up to 2, 3, 4 million subscribers and views, it means that nobody's going to watch their channel unless they have a vested interest in playing, recording, etc. It's not going to be your the minority will be like average Hey Joes who just listen to music. So my fear is that a lot of this hype and a lot of this fandom that is around bands like Polyphia and Peripheral and bands like that are not the general public. They are nerds like us. That's my fear.
Yes.
Now, obviously, I
Seriously, yeah.
can't. I don't have the stats to prove that, but I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of their fans are guitarists and band folk.
I did say it's what people were saying about Steve Vai and Joe Satriani. They were describing them in the 90s as, guitarists.
Mm.
Their music was for other musicians to enjoy. And the man in the street would have been just like, what is this? When does the singing start? Where's the chorus?
Yeah.
What's the bit I can tap my foot to? Maybe Satriani to a lesser extent, because, I mean, his music was always very kind of sort of bluesy rock and roll based kind of stuff. Some of Steve Vai's stuff is super. I mean, like even Sex and Religion, which has a lot of, I mean, it's Devin Townsend, isn't it, singing on it? But even then, it's a lot of it's very, very dense and very complicated, and it's like it's not really for the uninitiated. And I think you're right when you listen to, like, because one of the biggest guitar YouTubers, say, I mean, I think Rabia has over 300,000 subscribers right now. I know there are others who have more, but they're more like the sort of the funnier meme based guys. But like in terms of like being real legitimate musician kind of stuff, but it's like you look at Rabia and his output, and it's all like, it's prog metal basically. But it is very, with a very heavy emphasis on the progressive side of it, and that kind of music has always been for a very, very kind of niche audience, and it's only rarely that it really kind of pierces through into the mainstream, and even then it almost always becomes like some kind of inside joke, rather than, people talk about the Eagles, and everybody everybody knows the Eagles, and everyone knows Hotel California and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, or like Lynyrd Skynyrd or bands like that, the Who, whatever, the Led Zeppelin, the big bands, whatever. But it's like you think about bands like Rush, and it's like everyone's heard of Rush, but it's like all of my friends know that they've heard the name. It's like, but they wouldn't even be able to like say, oh, Tom Sawyer, because they haven't heard the music. Do you know what I mean? It's just become some kind of joke, and I think it bears it out. I think you're absolutely right when you say that a lot of this stuff, like Polyphia or whatever, it's mainly fodder for people who are really impressed by the way those guys handle their instrument. And then beyond that, I don't think there's a lot there really for the sort of the mainstream public to get their teeth into.
I
A band, a band is a good example of that. Meshuggah. I love Meshuggah. Absolutely love Meshuggah.
Me too. Yeah, yeah.
I've seen them live so many times, but there's almost little to no melody whatsoever. Even the vocals is rhythmic.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they became their own genre just of themselves. I know the gent thing born out of them, but like they're still miles ahead of all of it. And
yeah, they are. They sound exactly like themselves. No one else sounds like them.
I think that, see, the H string thing, they kicked off the H string fad That's not bad now. It's going to last now. I think there's a lot of them playing them, but everyone else after them, Meshuggah didn't initially play 8 strings. They played 7s and tuned them low, and they had problems. And some Swedish guy decided I could maybe build you an 8 string, but they did, but they weren't good. And then Ibanez had to go at it. So the 8 string was a tool that had to be invented for Meshuggah to do what they needed to do. Whereas everybody else are trying to do other things with it. I mean, it's playing it just because Meshuggah are, whereas they didn't initially start. And I play 7 strings and have for years, but the 8 string I've never got on with. And there's very few 8 string players I can think of that do anything interesting with it outside of them. Tosin Abasi been one.
Yeah, but I mean, the Tosin Abasi is doing it. I mean, he has his own techniques and everything, his own set of techniques. It's interesting in the context of this conversation. You know, when Helmut's talking about like forcing stuff to be more because I've gone down that road of like having 8 strings and everything, and I've had a bunch of 7 strings as well, and there's, you know, I've demoed a few of them on my channel and whatnot. And what I do find is that I think with 7 strings less so, because 7 strings they've become part of the kind of the general kind of consciousness. But I mean, on a tangent, which we don't necessarily have to go down now, what I've actually found is that it's quite possible to take a standard scale 6-string guitar and tune it down that low, and it's fine. But what I was going to say is that as soon as you get down the road of like 8-string guitars, where you feel like you're playing a cricket bat or an ironing board or something like that, the only thing to do with it is to go to a place where, in order to justify having an instrument with that kind of extended scale and that kind of extended capability, and obviously most of those instruments are usually kind of designed for, like, you know, aesthetically they're kind of metal guitars, right? What I tend to find with those is that you immediately go to a place where what you're trying to do is write perhaps unnecessarily complicated, very kind of progressive, very involved, elaborate, uneven time signature, you know, weird melodic kind of music that you wouldn't necessarily write if you were just playing a Les Paul or something, right?
Right.
And I think that can be like that. I think that's one of the drivers of that kind of thing. The sort of the pushing that sort of the pushing the toolkit to a place where it's designed specifically for guys who are going to get like super nerdy about what they're using it for. Interestingly, I think Meshuggah actually don't really go to that place, although their music's it's kind of inaccessible. But I think it's inaccessible in part because it's so aggressive. But I think in terms of its complexity, I mean, it does have very, very difficult time signatures. But other than that, in terms of the actual, like, they don't play guitars. If you know how to play in uneven meter, then it's not like they're doing anything that's technically complicated. Like, they're not shredding. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, just the solos are quite wacky, yeah. But there's not loads of notes in them.
Yeah, exactly. They're interesting and they're different, but those guys aren't like, you know, crazy fretboard technicians. You know, they're like the cleverness there, or the difficulty there, is in understanding the different meters that they're using.
I think part of the reason why they're maybe so still quite popular, like they're one of the most revered bands in the metal scene, is you can still actually headbang to it, because ultimately he still drums in 4/4 with his hands. He just follows the weird ones with the kicks.
I mean, Bleed is a banger, isn't it? There's no way around. Yeah.
So it still grooves. Like I've seen them live several times, and they're so good live. It's almost, you'd wonder how they even playing. It's that tight.
Yeah.
I mean, their live show is almost why they're revered. I think even more revered because of how tight they are and how they have this perfectionist nature. I see they just got announced as one of the headliners for Bloodstock.
Yes.
So that Bloodstock will probably be sell out quicker than anyone for a while.
It's, well, you know, we were talking about like collaborative working. There's actually a couple of documentaries about Meshuggah and how they write their albums and record their albums during production on YouTube, which, for anyone who's interested in that kind of thing, are definitely worth checking out, because I mean, they're different from anything else you would see within that genre. But the dynamic within the band is so unique, and obviously they're Scandinavian, so they're kind of very quiet, very sort of kind of inward-looking people, and they're sort of, you know, they're very kind of measured in the way they communicate, and the way they
what they need to.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's really interesting to watch the dynamic, and sometimes, like in some parts of those documentaries, it's almost like they've just met, the way they're kind of dealing with each other. So there's almost a kind of an awkwardness in the way they're kind of dealing with each other. It's not like, they're not bros. It's not a Motley Crue type thing where they're all banging groupies together and stuff and like partying and doing blow. It's like a business meeting, and it's very, very strange the way they do it. But it's totally fascinating to see how they manage to work together to come up with this insanely complicated music.
They always seem to be at the They always seem to be at the forefront of pushing things forward as well, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
Like I remember reading in a Guitar World years ago, back in the mid 2000s, that they used to write by sending roughly recording demos and sending MP3s back and forth by email, and nobody was doing that back then. Like I remember reading that a lot of people were talking about this was a crazy way to write, and now everybody does it that way.
Yeah.
To some
Yeah.
degree, even before you jam, if that's how you prepare and then you go and jam, to some degree you're doing that as part of the process now.
I think they have this very utilitarian approach to it, which is interesting, because I think there are a lot of bands that distinguish themselves by not really giving a shit about the conventions that came before. If they were the kind of bands that gave a fuck about using vintage Telecasters on their albums, or valve amps or whatever, oh, we have to do it this way because Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers did it this way. Oh, we have to record on tape or anything like that. They just their stuff wouldn't happen, because they're the kind of people who just aren't interested in that. They're like, we need to find a way of doing this. What's the way of doing this? We can do it this way. Let's do it. And that's it. And there's no question of the aesthetic of it. It's just like because they have their own very distinct aesthetic that just relies on them working the way they work.
Yeah, I think that years to come after they've done as a band and the world's moved on, look back on it as having an impact maybe almost as big as Black Sabbath did on metal. The modern scene, like everything. It's almost like the metal nowadays. You can almost look to pre-Meshuggah and post-Meshuggah to some degree. Like the trickle down effect that band has had is even bands that don't sound like them in any way are probably indirectly.
They're one of those bands that like have had this massive influence that most people have never heard of. It's almost like Fugazi, it's like, because they've been so hugely influential, but like most people have never heard Fugazi and don't know who they are.
The very first time I heard Meshuggah, I hated it, and I was about maybe 19, and it wasn't until a couple of years later then I got into them in a big way, and something clicked. When you kind of clicked, maybe it's because I wasn't experienced enough to know what was really happening, and then when eventually it did, like they actually had a massive impact on the way I write as well, like with the rhythms, like I'd be much more fascinated by rhythms than I would be with melody. I try to incorporate a lot of that into the riffs, but without sounding like that.
Yeah,
it's funny you mentioned that, man, because I find what I mean is the fact that you listen to them, you didn't like it, and then a few years later something clicked.
Yeah,
and
the light bulb went off, and it was like, wow. Then I just totally got it.
To me, it's exactly the same as whiskey.
That's an interesting segue.
Seriously, and peated whiskey. So most people that come to you, you say, hey, you drink whiskey, like doing the tours, somebody who's never had a proper scotch before, they might have had some bourbon and Coke, but that's probably the most of it, or something on the rocks, some bourbon on the rocks. But when they come here and they, oh, no, I've tried it once, I didn't like it. And what I always say is like, just wait. One day you'll be in the right place, with the right food, with the right company, and the right whiskey, and suddenly, boom.
That was exactly my experience. You're 100% right. You're 100% right. That was how I discovered that I liked whiskey. It was just a total random occurrence.
And I find with heavy music, it's the same. You just need that right scenario. Like I didn't like metal at all. I heard quite a lot of the older Metallica stuff and what. But what did it for me is we were at a rock festival over New Year's time in 1998, I think it was, and it was over New Year, so it was just local bands, just local South African bands. And the thing was finished like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I can't remember, But we ended up a whole bunch of people just sitting there, and the guys who did the music, they didn't switch off. They didn't switch the music off. They just started playing random CDs and stuff, right? Until like the next morning. And we just sat there, we kept drinking, and there was just a whole bunch of people we didn't know. And they were playing the Black fucking album through this massive speaker system, right? And it was like, oh, okay. And that was pretty much my turning point to listening to heavier stuff. After that, it just went downhill. It went, Sepultura, this side, and,
heavier.
But it took that one evening or that one morning in my drunkenness for that to flip from fuck metal to, oh my God, there's something in this.
I had a similar thing with Guinness when I was younger. When I started drinking Guinness for years. And I remember my dad telling me the first pint is really, really hard to drink till you get the taste for it. And then once you get onto the second one, then you're away with it. And I can conclude after several years of extensive research, he was right.
There's loads of things in life like that where it's like I always hated olives, and I didn't like them at all. And then it was just I was in. This is going to sound incredibly poncy, but I was in Manchester in the Champagne bar in Selfridges, and they just bunged a plate of olives in front of me, and I was quite merry by this point, and I just thought, fuck it, I'll give it a go, and I was just like, oh my God, they're delicious.
The olives with pimentos, yeah, they're great, and you can see the quality of the bar you're in when they don't give you peanuts, but they give you fucking olives.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're right. You're right. It is. I think it's those moments that kind of those little switches in your brain that kind of switch on. I think a lot of those I can peg it to the first time. Like the first time I heard Rage Against the Machine's first record. The first time I heard Korn's first record. Obviously, I think this is probably true for anyone of my/our age. The first time I heard Smells Like Teen Spirit. Just like a little light bulb going off in your head, and it's just like, music can be like this. And it's interesting because it doesn't always necessarily need to be the music itself, because I think I discovered heavy metal before I heard heavy metal. And it's really funny because the German side of my family, I had a couple of cousins who were some years older than me, and I remember going over to Germany to visit with them. In the late 80s it would have been, and my older cousin Henning had he had an electric guitar, which was like amazing. It's so cool. And then he had a wall covered in those vinyl picture discs, and it was like Judas Priest and Black Sabbath and AC/DC and all that kind of stuff. And all these picture discs were just, the art on them was just insane. It was just incredible. And obviously being German, they had like loads of flags of like Die Toten Hosen and everything like that. But
the Toten Hosen.
Yeah. And
my dog's called Sasha.
Really? Something about it just lit up my brain and just went, you know what? I've never heard any of this, but I know I love it. I think probably I think on that trip, like the first time I saw it on that trip, we were just on the way to like the train station or something like that to go back, and there was a little shop, and in the window I saw a flag, and I think it was Megadeth. It was the Mary Jane one. And I was just like, this is I'd have bought it, having never heard Megadeth in my entire life. I went into this shop and bought this flag, came home and put it on my wall because it was just so cool. And this was years before I even heard Megadeth. I was like, hadn't heard Megadeth, and I got like same thing, like deal with Iron Maiden. Like I was obsessed with the imagery before I even heard the music.
Yeah.
And then I heard the music, and I was like, everything I thought this was going to be and more, And I think when I heard I think when I heard Alice in Chains' Dirt, I think was that was the point where I realized that I wanted to do it myself. Because I just the whole of that record was just so genre, because again it's like it's music that you've never heard before, so you didn't realize music could do that, and then you're like, You can, and that's what kind of started me. And since that moment, I've always been a person who's been like, when I see something I like, I want to do it myself.
For me, it was what's it called, Francis Farmer or something on in Utero.
Frances Farmer will have her revenge on Seattle. Yeah.
In that part where it's just 2 bars of the 2-note riff, and it just goes into it, and it just always took me. So I can do this. I want to do this. This is what we're gonna have to do now. That little piece.
I'm a bit too young to have quite jumped on the grunge thing. It was kind of what time I came of age to be into music, really. I kind of was probably grew up in the new metal kind of era. So Korn been the first band I kind of got into.
Take it to the Matthews Bridge.
I was never a big Limp Bizkit fan, funnily enough. And then I just got into heavier and heavier and heavier stuff after that, but quite quickly.
When
I think Limp Bizkit were a gateway drug, weren't they?
So
Limp Bizkit were a gateway drug.
them and probably Linkin Park for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
for sure. Now, I remember I was I'm about 8 years younger than my older brother, and he was in his kind of late teens or something, and he just listened to, like, I'm gonna say the good pop music of the time. And we had this friend or something. I think he was one of my mother's boss's sons or something, and he came from Germany, and he visited us. Now, at the time, my brother had one of the proper first Sony Walkmans, and this guy brought some tapes, and one of them was Kiss. And my brother was letting me listen, because this was all new to us, the whole stereo earphone shit, and he didn't want me to listen to Kiss. He said it's too heavy, right? So I eventually put it on, and to this day I remember Kiss to being this fucking loud metal shit, right? And it isn't. I mean, it sucks. Like, Kiss is sucky, right? I'm sorry, it just is sucky, right?
Thank you.
And it really is just kind of pop with a bit of distorted guitars. But my memory of it was that this was this ungodly, over the top heavy shit, and it really wasn't. I can't remember how old I was. I must have been, I'm guessing 8 or 9. I think, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I'm remembering now. The first heavy metal album I ever heard was the Scorpions. It was Crazy World.
Oh shit. Scorpions.
Yeah. To this day, I that album, just, there's something about it that just, like, it's endlessly exciting to me.
We really went off topic, but that's normal.
Yes. Way off.
Yeah.
Where were we?
Well, this is an interesting thing for me, because it's like, so these days I don't listen to heavy metal at all, and I think this connects back to songwriting, because it's not necessarily a deliberate choice, really. It's just something that I prefer in my everyday kind of going about my business, kind of listening to music. I usually tend to listen to sort of quite well, I guess you'd call it hipster music, like sort of very sort of soft kind of indie folk. I listen to, like, Bon Iver and Ben Howard and stuff like that, and loads of other things. I'm a big fan of, like, Fiona Apple, and there's a really great artist called Rachel Yamagata, who a lot of people haven't heard of, but definitely worth checking out because she's amazing. And there's a lot of playlists on Spotify that are just like, deep, dark indie folk or whatever, and they have amazing stuff on there. Really atmospheric, really great melodies, really interesting themes, amazing vocals, that kind of stuff. Very kind of, usually very simple kind of orchestration and instrumentation, and that's sort of what I tend to listen to on a day-to-day basis. And I find that in terms of when I come back to writing the stuff that I write, which tends to be sort of the heavier side of metal and rock, I find that actually helps me to stay more inspired to write things that are kind of creatively. Let me put it another way. If I just listen to a bunch of heavy metal all the time, and then I go to write a bunch of heavy metal, then I tend to find that all I'm doing is just like kind of writing
Talking.
watered down versions of the stuff I've been listening to.
Yeah.
Whereas if I listen to music, it's like when I'm in my wife's car, I'm driving around, I just put it on Radio 3 and listen to random classical music because I find that kind of that goes into my mind and it kind of just it creates like a a sort of a bed of kind of things to inspire me later on down the road. That kind of will that I'll be able to then bring to the music that I'm writing, which is in a completely different genre. So I think that's one of the most useful things I've found actually to kind of bring a fresh approach, because when I then go to write heavy music, I'm not pulling from heavy music to write heavy music. I'm pulling from completely different genres. So I don't know if that...
I completely agree with you there. I find that I over the years I listen to death metal, a really extreme end of it, less and less and less. And it's almost like when I'm not listening, like not even listening to metal, is when I write my heaviest stuff. That makes sense. It's like even when we were jamming, like I'll really listen to metal on the way home. I can't, like, if you've been jamming for 3 or 4 hours and you've had your head mangled from blast beats and things, the last thing I can listen to on the way home is more blast beats.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of that is like I never get why people will try and start a band and they'll go, I want to start a metalcore band. Why do you pigeonhole yourself before you've even started?
Yes.
Like I find that my band, like like what you said earlier, Helmut, about if anyone has a suggestion, you just say it and you try it. It works, doesn't work, no one cares. You just no one's gonna get annoyed if you don't like their idea. But what I like about the band I have now is that we're all coming from very different ends of the spectrum. So it feels like we're creating something fresh without actually trying. And we didn't set out to be. I don't think we're a straight up death metal band by any stretch of the imagination. But maybe the new drummer's bringing a bit more of that element in. But the riffs aren't typical death metal, and the vocals certainly aren't. And it's not like we didn't set out to be, let's be this band or let's be that band. It's just try and jam with people that you click with, and you might create something new, rather than trying to go, let's be a metalcore band or deathcore band. Or if you pigeonhole yourself at the start, how do you ever create anything new?
It's interesting. I really find this very interesting, because the stuff that we are currently have, except for 2 of them, the actual riff itself and the notes, I don't want to say it's not like they're not in minor, but they are. If I played them on a undistorted guitar, they could actually be fairly happy. And not happy, but kind of jumpy. But the way that the guitar tone that's been chosen, the fact that we're down to drop C, the way the drums are played, it sounds really heavy. And I don't think that most of the time that my inspiration comes from metal at all, or even grunge to a degree. It is completely somewhere else, something that just happens and I like the sound of it and I keep going with that until it fits, right? So I don't think I've ever properly listened to something and went, I want to be like that, I want to sound like that. I have to say that there are certain elements in some songs that I've heard that I love the way that it did something, went somewhere or broke up a song or whatever, that I wanted the same effect, but not necessarily trying to desperately be a specific genre.
That kind of leads into the point we said at the start about artists or bands whose songwriting you admire.
Yeah.
Something we were going to discuss as well. Like you just said parts that like
parts, yeah.
Yeah, parts. Trying to emulate. Like I can think of bands that have maybe had an impact or at certain points, but I wouldn't say it would sound like them. I like there'd be certain thing like about Slaughter of the Soul by At the Gates was a game changing album for me because
Absolutely.
There's absolutely no fat on it at all. There's zero things in any of those songs that doesn't need to be there, and it creates a real sense of urgency the whole way through the album. Like there's
It
that's
was
like
it was
I was maybe padding out songs too much until I heard that.
it was the weirdest way I got into that band. There was a game called Armor in the early 2000s, and then somebody built a mod to modernize it, and then they put that whole album underneath the gameplay. I didn't know who they were. I had to find it out through other ways. That's how I found out about that album. And I was like, okay, this was still the Napster days, I think. I think I got it down from either from Pirate Bay or Napster. I got that album. And I was listening to that album probably for 2 years, nearly solidly.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how they called it a day back then because they couldn't make a career out of it? Forward 5 or 6 years and metalcore springs up by nicking two of their riffs and making a genre out of it.
Yeah.
And then everyone passed. It's
But it's
I suppose another good example of that is the band Sixth, who are back playing shows again. UK
I
band.
know the drummer in Sixth. He, well, actually, I don't know if it's still the same guy, but a guy from Preston, where I live, a guy called Darren Baxter. He was the drummer in Sixth for a while.
I can't remember who the drummer is now. Is it a guy called Ford?
No, it's probably a different guy.
They're a good example. Like if you think of bands like Periphery and that style of gent, Sixth were doing that like how many years prior, and then
I mean Dillinger Escape Plan and shit. You know, it's like they're like, you know, absolutely insane stuff like that. I think they kind of opened the door for that kind of, you know, insanity as far as that kind of stuff goes.
Another band that kind of followed that same route was Refused. They also like brought out like an album or two and then disappeared and then had to come back because, I mean, nearly 20 years later, just because they had this weird underground fan base which just grew and grew and grew until they went, okay, it might be worthwhile touring again and doing a couple.
That's what happened at the Gates. They came back for a festival or something in 2009, and it kind of blew up. And I mean, the recent stuff hasn't been anything to shout home about,
but they always stayed in the loop because I think some of them were producers and
some of them were in the Haunted. The guitar player and the bass player started the Haunted. The vocalist has a band called I can't remember the name of the other guy's band, Dysphere or something. He had that. He used to be big in tape trading and all that. The vocalist, so he done a lot for the scene, underground scene in the 90s and things, in the 80s, with tape trading from Europe to America. So yeah, they're always quite connected. But yeah, they went on to the drummer. Well, I don't know if he still is, but he was in Cradle of Filth for a while as well.
All right.
I'm sure he was. He plays in the Haunted as well. The drummer, it's the drummer, and the twins. Haunted varying degrees. The guitar player's not now. What's his name? Anders Bjorler. He left the Haunted years ago, and Ola England replaced him. Then he left at the Gates as well, but he's now came back. So he's back in it. It's the classic lineup of At the Gates back again now. So hopefully the next album might reflect that.
Yeah. The songwriting that I really the last few years is definitely the last few albums. Actually, all the albums from Mastodon and some of the Opeth stuff purely from a songwriting point of view. Like the Ghost of Perdition, I still think is probably one of the best written 14 minutes that I've ever heard. Like how they managed to intertwine those three really different aspects of music into one long pretty thing. I can listen to that thing over and over, and the way that they flow from one thing into another. And I don't really pay attention to the lyrics because I don't think the lyrics are that amazing, but it doesn't bother me because I tend to, unless the lyrics are really good, I don't really care about them. If you know
they're a little bit heroic fantasy, aren't they? The Mastodon's lyrics,
but too proggy, I suppose, from a lyrical point of view. But there was
a unique way of writing lyrics, at least on the first few albums. Like I was huge into the Brown Leviathan and Odd Mountain. And then I kind of
sorry, I was talking about Opeth. I think that the Mastodon lyrics, I think they are always very well kind of thought out. No, I was sorry. I'm sorry. I was talking about both of them, but when it came to the lyrics, I was talking about Opeth. I think Mastodon are a properly well-rounded machine. They do good music. They are a good bunch of guys. I don't know. They do everything well. Have you watched the making of Hushed and Grim? It's on YouTube. It's about an hour and a half long.
Yeah.
It's really worth watching. It's just a good ride. Definitely a bunch of folk that don't take themselves too seriously, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, that's a good example of like a making of that's like the opposite of the Meshuggah making ofs. They're all just like having a good time and hanging out and being pals and everything, and like Meshuggah like having business meetings and looking at each other stony faced.
Yeah,
that's the Nordic way.
Yeah, I would say in terms of songwriting, I think for me, my gold standard probably will always be Soundgarden's Super Unknown. I think Chris Cornell in particular. I would say also like special mention for Euphoria Morning, which is like his first solo record, which is absolutely amazing. But I think Super Unknown has it's got it all, because it's one of the, it's like when you think about it, Black Hole Sun is a song in an uneven time signature, and yet it managed to be an absolute smash hit. It's downbeat. It's about, I mean, I understand obviously songs about drugs at the time were a little bit more popular than necessarily would be these days, but I think it's such a well-rounded record, and I think all the songs on it are bangers. And I think a lot of them are very, very, very special. And it's also, they're a band that don't hesitate to use uneven time signatures, even though they don't necessarily understand them themselves. At least they claim to not.
Yeah.
They used all kinds of weird tunings, all kinds of weird instrumentation. Music, I mean, in terms of the performances, just, vocally, he's just amazing. He was amazing.
He's some loss, man. He's some loss.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like him and Tom Petty, I think, were like, you hear about people sort of getting upset when celebrities die and everything. I think for me, it was like, it really kind of hit me hard when he died, especially because it was such a stupid way to go. And I think, Tom Petty was probably not, it wasn't unexpected because, he was an old man and everything, but obviously Tom Petty's just one of those kind of, he's just an absolute legend. But I think with Chris Cornell, it just had that sort of, it was just an extension of all that sort of 90s tragedy, that whole Kurt Cobain thing, but I think his body of work is just exceptional. And even, I was never a big fan of Audio Slave, to be honest. I always thought, no, Audio Slave, they were less good than Rage Against the Machine, and they were less good than Soundgarden. So I just thought it's a waste of time.
I loved the sound of that album. I really loved the sound of it. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there were great songs. It was a good album, but it did not even remotely compare to Soundgarden. What's the last Soundgarden album called again?
King Animal.
King Animal, right? When that came out, I was like, oh man, this is literally just Super Unknown and Bad Motorfinger and all of that all in one album. And I kind of dismissed it at first. I kind of quickly skipped through it, and I didn't really like. And then I moaned about it once, and a good friend of mine said to me, no, you're wrong. You have to listen to it again. And I did. Yeah. And I find that on par for me.
Bones and Birds is amazing.
It is such a good album. But
yeah,
you're right.
I saw them on the.
Sorry.
I saw them on the Down on the Upside tour, '96, and that was just like it was. There was nothing. There was no pyro. There was no light show. There was nothing. It was just four guys. I think the extent of set decoration was like they had a big red velvet curtain behind them. And they came out and they just played for like 2.5 hours or something like that. And honestly, it was just incredible. It was so good. And I think it was like maybe their third to last show before they split up. And I mean, considering that they apparently all hated each other at the time, they played an amazing show. It was it was fucking incredible. It was really good. That was in Paris that I saw them at the Zenith.
The
But yeah, I remember that album was great as well. It wasn't as good as Super Unknown, but it was still a great record.
one of my favorite, the second favorite gig now after seeing Brutus live, which was just fucked up, man. That was an experience. But we went to see the Pixies at the SECC, which is a big hall, way too big in my opinion for the Pixies. But this was probably 2011, 2012, maybe somewhere around there. And what happened was that it was the usual kind of format where they start playing, light show, all of that, and it was probably about half an hour in, and all the lights just went on, and it was as if, like, when a band is finished and then they come back for like another 2-song a chorus or something, right? Or not a chorus, a little carry on. But the rest of the hour, or probably more than an hour, they just played. It was just the lights on, and like fully on, as if people are coming and going, and the show just went on. That was really amazing, because it was just like, it was the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
But let me tell you about.
Did that. I saw them in 2000 again in Paris, but it was in Bercy, which is like a huge arena. And for the last 20 minutes of the show, they just brought the house lights up. And it was like, and they just played the end of the show with the house lights up. It was really weird.
No, this was at least, I don't think it was more than half an hour they played with like concert lights. It was really weird. There was this weird moment where they had like TV screens behind them. I can't believe I'm saying this. It was just so memorable. They had TV screens behind them, and then they obviously had some cameras on stage. And the cameras on stage would then go from one musician to the next and go to the drummer now. And there's this piece where, like, so whatever the camera was filming, they would also show on one of the screens. And he's a bit of a big guy, right? So he's playing his guitar and everything's schwoogling, right? And then I've got this camera and this big picture of this fucking marshmallow going like this. It's like, dude, you're a fucking cameraman. Choose a better angle. I mean, be a bit little fucking thoughtful. Oh man, that was funny. But if you guys, honestly, even Peter, I don't know what your thoughts are on that Brutus, and it's probably not your type of music, but I have never seen anything like that. I've never seen such pure fucking intensity from a person as the chick who sings and plays the drum. It's incredible to watch, and she does it with such a. I mean, she's tiny, right? And she sits there behind her drums, and she just fucking blows the whole fucking place down. It is a sight to see. I've never experienced anything like that. Now, you can take these big fucking drummers playing fucking Slayer and shit, and literally this chick on behind her drums and the way she sings, fucking bellows, never mind sings. It was unbelievable. So good. Man, to me, that's what music is all about. It's this, when you feel like, you're gonna become some sort of emotional wreck if the music doesn't stop soon. That was something else. That was probably one of my favorite gigs I've ever been to, and it was just in audio, man. It was just in that that place is the size of my living room.
Quite a cool venue. I've played in audio a few times. It's quite a cool venue. It's really dingy as fuck, isn't it? But
was that
I like playing there.
Was that the place that I met you? When you,
yes,
was that audio?
I believe so. Yeah.
Why do I feel like it was a different place? The inside was different. I fucking don't know why.
Can you remember who we were playing with? And I'll tell you what the venue was.
No. But I do remember liking all the bands that played that night. I thought they were all good. That's the only thing I remember.
We played on some funny bills though, because we were a death metal band, but we had other stuff in the mix. So we played on some strange lineups, but we could make it work because we weren't like straight up death metal.
I remember meeting you and D at the Burger King before we went headed up. You, Chris, and D. And then we headed up to audio. Or wherever you played. But I'm sure it was audio.
We played in audio quite a few times, so I can't really remember too well. Well, it wasn't Cattle Decapitation, was it? No, that wasn't audio. That was Ivory Blacks. They were an amazing band. That guy, the vocalist in that band, is absolutely mental. Like, you wouldn't even think it was a human being singing half the time. And I was dubious that he was able to pull it off live until I actually got to witness it from the side of the stage. What a band they were. They actually changed a lot for playing with them. That was the biggest show we played to date, was them. And it changed a lot the way we used to do the march and things. More professional. They were quite interesting the way they done it. We learned a lot, and the girl they had doing march kind of was quite nice, and they picked up a lot from them, and how we upped our march game a lot after that, and the way we used to do it. Oh, they were an incredible band live as well. Didn't even bother with a sound check; just had a line check.
Okay.
Yeah, because they'd been pretty much sleeping in the van for about 4 days, and they were meant to come out. We meant to come out to the cat house drinking with us afterwards, but they managed to get a hotel in Glasgow, so they were going to get a shower and a sleep and never made it out. The bass player they had at the time now plays in a band with Phil Anselmo. They called again Scour, I think, kind of a black metal / death metal band. He plays guitar in that. He's not in Cattle Decap anymore, and I think he plays in Phil Anselmo's solo band as well. Plays bass. But yeah, he was meant to be coming out with him in particular, but I think they'd finally managed to blag somewhere to sleep and actually get a shower that night after living in the back of this really old burgundy transit van for about 4 days with a trailer. Like, talk about slumming it. Like, it just shows you like they're like one of the more well-known bands in death metal, and they go on tour and they're playing in fucking Ivory Blacks and living in a transit for 4 days. Not all glamour.
I think that's that's niche genres for you though, isn't it? If you want to make if you want to do the thing. We played a show with this this pair of sisters. They're called the Soap Girls, and I think we were just really keen to play with them because notoriously they just get naked on stage, and they did, and it was great. They were a really good band. They were really, really entertaining. But they were, I think the show with us was the last one they were playing in the UK, and then they went out to Japan. And they come back to the UK, but they've been playing like Germany and Belgium and all kinds of places in Europe and everything like that. And then they went to the States after that. But yeah, but they, again, they're total shoestring stuff. I mean, they're living in some kind of tiny little bus, and they're just getting out there, and it's just weird because they're just like they're just a pair of skinny little girls. I think they're sisters, and they just play this sort of really kind of rowdy punk rock, and it's just it's just total punk rock. It doesn't aspire to be anything other than it is, and they're just shouty and rowdy, and they get naked, and it's great. But they're not making any. They'll never be in the charts. They'll never make any real money out of it.
Did they pull an L7?
I don't think they're quite as. I mean, their slant is still kind of quite feminist, but they are both very, very attractive at the same time. So it's like there's a bit more glamour to it.
Okay.
I remember seeing L7. I think one of them pulled out a tampon and threw it into the audience. There's none of that going on.
No, but L7 had that competition where if you won it, you got to sleep with one of them. I can't remember which one.
Was that L7? I remember Rock
L7.
Bitch definitely did that kind of stuff.
But that was years ago, man. I can't even remember.
Yeah, it's true.
And it felt like it was like when L7 was pretty much dead already for years. Like you never heard about it, as if it was some sort of comeback stunt or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think my experience of L7, my memory of L7 is that they sort of accidentally got lumped in with the whole grunge thing because they were a bit like people were trying to sign the next hole.
Yeah.
They got L7 was one
No,
of the bands that got signed, and they did a bit of business, and that's
were they
kind of
not?
it. But
Were they not already going before Hole?
oh yeah, yeah, no, definitely, yeah, yeah. But they got they got a I think they got a major label deal because Hull got a major label deal,
Ah,
and
yeah, I
so
see what you mean. I see
at
what
the
you
time
mean.
everyone was trying to sign the same bands.
Yeah, if you look at these history things about grunge and stuff, the stories they always tell the same stories. Like the moment that Nirvana broke, and then you had this combination of Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and some of the others.
Yeah,
Like any band that even sounded remotely like that, they just took a chance on them. And Geffen will just sign them. Boom, 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 boom. you
yeah,
know.
That runs in cycles, doesn't it? You got the same thing when new metal exploded. You had like Korn, Limp Bizkit, Deftones, System of a Down, maybe, and then that kind of shaped it, and then it
yeah,
just got watered down, watered down, watered down rubbish after that. And
yeah,
As they say, pop will
yeah.
eat itself.
That's it. Yeah, it's an awful model. It's an awful model because you start off with Pearl Jam and you end up with Creed.
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Well, the problem with Pearl Jam is you started with Pearl Jam and then you end up with Pearl Jam. That was the problem. Like I
No.
loved the first three albums of Pearl Jam, and then, yeah, unfortunately.
I have up until the very last one, I've liked Pearl Jam, and I think my favorite Pearl Jam album is Riot Act. And the last one was kind of like a bit of a head scratcher, but right up until then, I was like I was on board with Pearl Jam.
Yeah, I might need to like explain myself. I don't think they're a bad band. It's just I didn't I didn't resonate with anything after that. That's all. You know.
Yeah, I never got into them. Never really was a fan. Not, I don't hate them. I just don't listen to them. I can't really get
You
into
were
it.
born in the wrong time. You said that before.
Yeah, yeah, probably it. Yeah, yeah. The grunge thing didn't really catch at me. Like,
Yeah, I don't know. I like grunge. I mean, from a songwriting point of view, I also like grunge because they were also not the obvious ones, but a lot of them wrote songs in a way that was never written before. You know, they did things differently.
I
Um,
could appreciate Soundgarden for that. Like what you were talking about earlier with putting different time signatures in massive hits, even if it was unintentional. And they kind of had probably the closest to, if wise, closest to metal than the rest of them, maybe.
I agree.
I,
They did
I think Alice in Chains are arguably quite metal as well, just in a
Yeah,
different.
Soundgarden probably had a massive Black Sabbath influence.
probably.
Definitely, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you guys watch that GHS show, the one where he was slating the grunge Bible about what bands are in there and what bands were left out, and he was going a bit on a tangent. I don't actually think Soundgarden was as grunge as it should be, and one of the main reasons I say that is because Soundgarden actually knew what they were doing. Most of the other grunge bands actually
Yeah.
didn't. That's partly why they were fucking grunge. that's my
Soundgarden
opinion anyway.
were actually the first band to get a major label deal because they've been going the longest. They've been going since like the mid '80s.
Who?
Um,
Soundgarden.
Soundgarden,
Yeah.
yeah. They got a major label deal before anyone else did. Before even, and then after that, it was oh, what were they called? Mother Love Bone. Um, and then it was after all that so there was already major label stuff happening around there, but it was really with the Nirvana stuff that the bandwagon really took off.
Yeah, but
I say, but
Did Soundgarden do a Pantera then? Like sound like glam and then do a detour into the
Yeah.
heavier stuff?
no, Soundgarden were a lot more punk metal, and then they went into a much more kind of melodic alternative territory.
Yeah.
So the earliest Soundgarden records were like very heavy and quite fast, and the singing was tended to be very like a lot of high pitched wailing. I mean, Chris Connell's known for his vocal range, but he was like right up there all the time. And then as time went on, you can still hear some of it on Bad Motorfinger, but like, so when which was their first big record, but then on Super Unknown, it became a lot more kind of accessible. You know, there's a lot more kind of mid-rangey vocals, a lot more kind of melodic choruses, stuff you could sing along to. And then by the time they got to Down on the Upside, I wouldn't say it's like their most commercial record. It's about as commercial as Super Unknown, but it's very kind of again, it's very approachable in terms of like how sort of rock it is. But yeah, it's you know, I mean, grunge is a difficult thing because grunge isn't really, you know, it's not a label that makes sense in any, because none of the grunge bands sounded like each other really.
Yeah, exactly. That's why a lot of
So
people say it's more an aesthetic thing than it is a musical genre. And I agree with that to a
definitely.
degree. But that's kind of why the only thing to me that is grungy about Soundgarden is their aesthetic in those days. But I think their music was way too good. dare I say.
Sophisticated.
Sophisticated, better word, thank you. For
yeah, they weren't like, to me like grunge is like Mudhoney.
mm,
You know, that's what it is to
even
me. Yeah.
Nevermind, to me, I wouldn't classify it as grunge either. Like
Bleach,
Incesticide, stuff
Bleach
like
was
that.
definitely
Bleach,
grunge.
yeah, sure, but not Nevermind at the very least.
No, the production on that's way too clean. You listen to it, feels like it's encased in lucite. I think a lot of that's to do with like the Andy Wallace mix on that record, which is very, very clean and very. I mean, it's not pop per se, but it's very listenable. There's
Radio
no kind of
friendly.
roughness to it, you know.
Yeah. So I suppose in a weird and wonderful way we have kind of covered to a degree what bands we kind of look for inspiration.
Yeah.
To be more specific, I don't know anymore, because you were talking about earlier about how you tend to listen to quite different stuff than what you actually tend to make. I tend to listen to a lot of different stuff within a certain range, all the way from grunge to death metal. But I don't really step out of that a lot. It's different
Well,
now
I
since my youngest started playing piano, because she's also starting to want to listen to, like, she'll listen to anything I listen to, but she also starts, because she can read music, she will pick up stuff and she will try and play classical stuff, Chopin and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it kind of forces me to listen to that to a degree, which I find interesting, because I mean, these guys were the old masters, you know. They started the popular music revolution, dare I say.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that we forget is that even within the different genres, the actual stuff is actually fairly all over the show. But I often go all the way back to the 90s, to the Sepultura kind of stuff, the Deicide stuff, and I just put it on just loud, and that's just it. And there's a lot of that in there for me that I like. There's a lot of simplicity in the stuff. There's a lot of great guitar tones that, I always say this, but I still think the 90s were the best for guitar tones. Not the overall production, not necessarily, but there's certain aspects of those days which I really like. And so I wouldn't say there's a specific band, but there's definitely certain eras. There's one album which I just find incredible to this day, which was done by a bunch of 15-year-olds. Silverchair, the first one, the Frog Stomp.
Frog Stomp, right?
What a classic fucking album. And you just can't imagine these kids writing that and producing that and getting that out. It was...
Yeah.
So I suppose part of the inspiration is not just the music that they wrote, but also that they managed to do it, that it can be done, kind of thing.
Yeah, it was like they won a competition or something, didn't they? And like, so 3 tracks off that were like professionally produced because they'd won a competition.
Yeah, some sort of...
And then those Yeah, those 3 tracks were like an EP, and then off that they got their deal, and then they just made the rest of the record, and that's where that record comes from.
Here's a fucking story for you, right? No, I'm not. So apparently the story goes. So they win this thing, they get a record deal. The record comes out, becomes massive in Australia and in the US. They do through some sort of 3 songs or demo or something. They then get shipped off to America. And I think Frog Stomp, it was either Frog Stomp or the one afterward, was then produced by Joe Barresi.
Freak Show, yeah.
Then Paul Adams, or what's his name? Adams from Tool. They were going to do their next album with Joe Barresi. Adam Jones.
Yeah.
He then goes, "Oh, I love this guitar sound," and he actually gives Joe Barresi the Frog Stomp. One of the 2 albums. This is the guitar tone I want for this album, and then they modeled their guitar tone on that album on the fucking either Frog Stomp or the one after, which I found fucking insane. And that's where the story comes in from, because I was trying to recreate the sound of Frog Stomp, and there is this mismatch. Some say it was a Soldano, some say it was a Marshall 900, and apparently it was a 900, and because that was then ended up being the same amp being used for. I wish I should look at the timings. It'll be one of the early Tool albums. That's crazy, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah, the band that influenced by someone so young, you normally go around.
Yeah, but it is a great guitar. You should listen to it, Peter, just for the guitar tone. I mean, it's not a metal guitar. It's not something that you would want to emulate for what you're doing, but it's just really interesting, actually, because there's so much depth in that and character in the distortion on that. It's really cool.
It's funny.
It still feels very loose though when you listen to it. It's like it doesn't feel like they've really. It doesn't feel overproduced in any way. It doesn't feel like they've tried to like square it up and quantize it. It still feels very kind of natural and organic, doesn't it?
For sure, for sure. I mean, these were still the tape days, but also I don't even think that it was double tracked.
No.
I don't know.
I think there's some stereoing, as in they've split the signal, or maybe just had 2 mics on a cab and panned them or whatever. But
possibly
beyond that, I don't think there's a lot of double tracking of the rhythm tracks going on. No.
Yeah, but the old AC/DC stuff was also recorded like that. They literally just hit the guitar right down the middle.
Yeah, well, it's better than the early Van Halen stuff where it's like the bass is on one side and the guitar's on the other side. So if you're in your car and you have one speaker that doesn't work, there's no guitar.
Well, this is what I nearly did on this recording, because beginning last year is when I decided I'm going to listen to Opeth and see what it's all about. And I listened to the Titans of Something, that live show down at Red Rocks, and I loved it. And then I will always just listen to it on the hi-fi or on the TV. And then one night I was going to sleep with it and I had it on my headphones. And in the Ghost of Perdition, there's one part where he starts playing a short solo piece. And you can clearly hear that the recording on that album, on that live thing, was done from the live show. And you have the rhythm guitar on the left, and suddenly the solo comes out on the right. And there's no overlap. There's no additional tracking. There's no nothing. And I was massively surprised how you don't realize it until you actually have, the stereo image really clear in front of you. You can hear the one is split from the other. And what I thought was cool about it was that the fact that it really works well. You didn't lose any kind of impact. You didn't lose any kind of fullness of the tone or anything like that. So I was really tempted to do some of the recording that to have like just left and right, and if there's a lead, it's just right, not gonna like double track that piece and dip it down a bit and bring the lead over the top in the middle. But I ended up not doing it, which I kind of regret. But it is interesting that it does work. Like fair enough. It isn't bass and guitar. Like, that's another story.
I do think bass needs to kind of be in the middle a little bit, just because otherwise you just leaves too much of a space. But you're right, and I resonate. You know, when you say you regret kind of maybe not giving it a go, because it's like increasingly I'm finding myself wanting to kind of not track stuff up as much. So there's an album that I need to mention by a band called 16 Horsepower, who don't exist anymore. But the frontman, David Eugene Edwards, he's this crazy religious fundamentalist genius. He's not really. I mean, he's actually very liberal, and he is quite a nice person. But he does have a very sincere and profound belief in God, which features very heavily in his music, which is why that's relevant. But there's maybe 4 or 5 records I think that band did, but this specific one is called Secret South, and I just recommend checking it out, because not only are the songs on it absolutely brilliant, but the production on it is it's something else. It's very, very special. The sound of the album, it's crazy, because a lot of their instrumentation is sort of traditional Americana kind of stuff. There's a lot of mandolin, a lot of banjo, a lot of sort of old fiddles and stuff like that going on. It's very creepy, old sort of kind of Southern Bible rock, very sort of kind of creepy old cowboy music kind of stuff. But it also has a very kind of dark, kind of heavy rock influence to it as well. Very, very atmospheric. He's got an amazing voice, and his lyrics are very, very poignant. And they're poignant because you know that he really believes this stuff he's talking about, like sin and redemption and all that kind of stuff. So 16 Horsepower, Secret South, check it out. It just sounds incredible, and it's just there you go. That's another album I need to refer to in terms of like standards of songwriting. The songs on there are just absolutely perfect. There's a song on it called Splinters, which I think is probably the best song on the record. And it's really interestingly done. It's quite surprising. The time signatures aren't uneven, but they feel uneven because of the way the song is structured. And it's a very simple song in the way that it's written, but it's also incredibly complicated. Without hearing it, it's very difficult to describe, but it's a really great record.
Are you familiar with Leprous?
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're not the Pitfalls. I can't remember the name of the current one. She's pretty good as well. But one before that, Pitfalls, is an absolute masterclass in dynamics. Like, it's some of the songs they just build and build and build, and it feels like forever before it eventually takes off. That would be a big influence on me recently as well. They're not like very heavy by any standards, but guy's voice is amazing as well.
Yeah.
The songwriting on the last few albums is incredible.
Along those lines, a band called Carnival.
Yeah, Carnival as well. Yeah,
Carnival their album Sound Awake is just incredible. It sounds incredible. The production on it is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And actually, so the drums I use at the moment, Superior Drummer have a pack called, I think, Progressive Foundry, and it's Steve Judd from Carnival, who has multi-sampled all the drums on that, and it's produced by the same guy who produced Sound Awake, and it's just an incredible record.
Yeah, I was actually listening to that not that long ago, actually. Yeah.
You were talking earlier about metal being like the hardest thing to mix because of the overflow of frequencies that all need to somehow be, stand out.
It's probably meant harder, but the likes of me tuning even lower and lower and lower. All the time.
Yeah. Like, tighten up that bottom end. Okay, sidechain. Fuck it. No, but there's so years ago when I still had the studio down here, these guys came in. Some of them I knew vaguely, and they They're a folk punk band, and they're all really good at what they do, and the stuff was really cool. And I recorded them, and I can't believe I pulled it off, because they had a drummer who was a fucking beast. This older guy, and he was actually like a band drummer. What do you call them? A military band drummer. So that was part of the reason why it was not too hard to mix, because he hit the drums so hard, so that the recording of the drum was nearly perfect without mixing, because it was just so consistent. But then you had the bass, and then you had guitar left and right, double tracked, plus little noodly lead bits over them. Then you had a violin on top of that, and what do you call the fucking thing?
Squeeze box, accordion.
Squeeze box, accordion on top of that. And then there were little pieces of mandolin as well. So, and all of them sit in exactly the same fucking frequency range. And to try and pick that shit out. And they were playing fast. It wasn't slow stuff. It was quite punky stuff. Jesus, that was a fucking mission and a half.
You should have done the world a favor and deleted the accordion tracks.
You know, I've never ever to this day, because we're still like on Facebook and stuff, the guys and me, and like, there probably not a week goes by that somebody doesn't make a remark like that to the guy who played the accordion. Like, it's just a running joke.
He deserves it.
Well, okay, so that band I was talking about, 16 Horsepower, they have a song called American Wheeze, and it's, I mean, technically it's an accordion, although it's called a Chemnitzer concertina that he plays on it. And honestly,
we'll let him away with it then.
Yeah, listen to it. It will change your mind about accordions. It's very much not that kind of bal musette kind of cliched holiday in Paris kind of sound. It's a much creepier kind of old school kind of
So the accordion player and the violinist were fucking accomplished motherfuckers like I've ever seen. So they've not heard any of the songs. They were brought in because he just wanted to pack shit out that was folky onto this record, the guy who wanted it recorded. So as we were there, he listened to the shit, and then he sat there and fucking ad-libbed stuff over it, and it was spot on every time. He had such an ear, the guy. It was crazy. Actually,
yeah, folk musicians are just they're you run into a proper folk musician and it's always like he's the best musician you'll ever see. They're always just incredible.
Well, I think that's one of my regrets, is that I started playing guitar so late, and I never really went down the route to really learn music theory properly. I mean, my daughter, she knows all the scales. She's fucking 10. It's fucked up. And, it's like, I always thought I could get by because, I only want to do what I want to do, and I can do something if I need to do it. I can quickly learn what I need to learn, and I've always been too confident about that fact, and I really regret it, because if you see how some people pick up something because they understand it. I can play shit by ear. I can figure out when something is wrong. I know when something's wrong. I know when something's right. But that's different from really understanding what's happening mathematically, dare I say, underneath it all.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm in the same boat. My knowledge of music theory is, well, I have a little bit, but it's probably not worth mentioning. It's not something definitely not kind of something I'd be able to teach to anyone else. I think that to me comes under like utility. It's what I use it for, what I don't use it for. I feel like, and this is just me, but my fear, I guess, is that if I started learning about modes and circular fifths, and I mean I don't know what the circular fifths is, but I keep hearing it. I feel like if I learned all that stuff, then I might disappear up my own arse. Do you know what I mean? And you're like, okay, well, I've got to get a Phrygian Mixolydian diminished ninth scale in this. You know, it's like, well, why? You know, I feel like most of the music I listen to is like that. You know, people just you know, it's like it's pentatonic. That's all it is, and it's like that's all I really ever want to listen to, and that's all I really ever want to play. And I kind of know that stuff, and I feel like it's possible that it might open up a whole new vista for me, but I'm not sure that it would make the music that I write any better, or people who listen to it would appreciate it anymore or anything like that. So I kind of I think of it like I've got this far without knowing more than I do in a way. So I'm not saying I wouldn't want. I'm not saying I'm against learning it. I'm just saying that I don't necessarily feel the need to put much energy into it. I think there are other things that I want to kind of that I know that if I focus on, I know will make my music better. And theory probably isn't. I feel like theory is like more like a language to communicate with people. And I feel like most of the musicians I know even less theory than I do. So there's kind of like it would be a pointless task.
There's nothing that you've said in the last 2 minutes or so that I could disagree with. And I don't believe for a minute that knowing the theory will necessarily make anything better. But I've noticed over the last year or so that if I knew a bit more theory, there's certain things that I would have been able to do easier or possibly even better. One of the biggest problems is when you're constantly changing your guitar tuning, right? To transpose stuff, for example, right?
Yeah.
That's not just music theory, but that's also understanding your fretboard a bit better, what, especially when you're starting to fuck around with tunings. That was one thing. And the other thing is I try to write leads in a certain way that do something specific for that instead of just being a noodly bit. And for that piece, that's exactly where I think the music knowledge can be very beneficial to write better harmonies and leads in certain scenarios. You know?
Yeah, it can, especially when you're playing like maybe the faster stuff on your scale patterns and things. Then it's something you don't have to think about.
Yeah. And I'm really new at that, so that's something.
It's definitely true that when you see a guitar player who knows all their scales and modes and all that kind of stuff, and you see them play their guitar, and they do play stuff, and you're like, I never would have thought of playing that. That wouldn't have even occurred to me to play that sequence of notes, and it's clear that they're playing it because they understand a mode or a scale that you don't know.
Yeah.
But what I would say also though is that if you're looking for what I tend to find with like when I'm writing a guitar solo, for instance, I think that sometimes you just go to your what I think of as like your guitar store routines, as in like the things you play when someone hands you a guitar or whatever. But if I'm trying to write something specific that goes to a specific thing and I'm not finding it on a guitar, I find that changing instrument is a helpful way of doing it. So it's like I might, instead of like if I'm looking for a guitar solo that I want to write, I might actually just try playing it on a piano or something, or I might just try humming it instead, or like
Yeah, because you won't fall into the box, your typical shapes that you would.
Yeah, it cuts out the muscle memory of the shapes that you go to. What you hear yourself playing on the guitar. If you go to the keyboard, because I don't know how to play this, it's just there. I know how to make a chord, but it's mainly there so I can kind of just kind of rough out stuff to go behind the stuff I record, and then I'll correct it in MIDI. But if I'm looking for like an interesting run or something like that, I will go to this and I'll try playing it with a piano sound or a Hammond sound or something like that, just to get a feel for something different, and then that might translate into a better idea. It's usually kind of where I go to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, changing your approach so you don't fall into the same patterns. Yeah, I've been doing different exercises, for stretching, wider intervals and things. For the same reason, to try and break myself out of patterns, because I found that when I'd be working on leads, I was falling into the same traps, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think that's the thing that happens to a lot of guitar players. I've seen it so much. Like, I think probably every guitar player I know gets to this point where, and I'm guilty of it too, where they kind of decide that they're good enough. Do you know what I mean? And they kind of plateau, and then that's it. That's the amount of guitar playing they know, and they don't really ever get any better than that. And it might be at any level. Like some guy might have just stopped at learning cowboy chords, and another guy might have stopped at being able to play like some riffs from Ride the Lightning, you know. And then another guy he might have one technique, like he can play a solo and he can do like double-handed tapping, and then that's kind of it. And then the evolution at that point kind of stops there. And I think that sort of, like I say, I'm guilty of that too. Like, I know what I know on the guitar, and it's very rare that I've kind of picked up a new skill. So I'm probably as good as I have been for the past 10 years or whatever, without ever really having developed much beyond that. And I do occasionally try and make an effort to kind of move beyond that at this, but it's like, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of a tough, because there's also this kind of voice in my head that's like, it's almost the same thing as learning scales and modes. I kind of worry that if I get into the situation where I start learning how to shred, then I'll just turn into one of those people who's like, watch me shred, you know. And I don't like it when other people do it, so I don't want to turn into someone who does it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's for me, because I write a lot. Percentage of lead I play compared to riffs is like 2% to 98%.
Yeah.
Whenever I feel like I need humbled on guitar, I just try playing lead. Or I can working on leads for me is really hard. Like it takes me ages. Doesn't come easily, and I second guess myself more. Whereas with riffs, I wouldn't as much, if at all.
Yeah.
Just you just know because you do so much of it.
So, have you seen the film The Commitments?
Oh, years ago. I can barely remember it.
Come on, you're an Irishman. You have to have seen the film The Commitments.
Oh, I've
Practically.
seen it.
No, I mean, so there's a line in it where I think they have a saxophone player in the band, and at one point during a set, he starts just noodling away, and I think someone says to him that soul solos have corners. You were spiraling. That's jazz, and I think that sort of the sentiment there is that basically it's like when I go for a guitar solo, I think of like the guitar solo from Nevermind. From Smells Like Teen Spirit, where all it's doing is just copying the vocal line from the verse, right? So I'm not saying that all guitar solos should be that that direct and that simple, just a lift of another part of the song. But to me, a good guitar solo should derive from themes that already exist within the song and should evolve from there. Yeah. So it's interesting that I think to me I used to have this theory that there's only really 5 guitar solos. And I think so. There's
Kirk Hammett. There's one.
Well, yes, Kirk Hammett has The Unforgiven, right? So the guitar solo from The Unforgiven, that's one of them. And then there's the solo from Stairway to Heaven. And then there's the solo from Freebird. And then there's the solo from Hotel California.
Yeah.
And the fifth one is
Back in Black.
I forget what the fifth one is, but you get the idea, right? And the thing that all of those solos have in common is that they evolve from melodic themes that exist within the song already. And they take them to a different place, and there's a lot more going on within them. But they aren't like, just some, obviously it's not limited to just those solos, but the idea is basically that a really good solo should take a key melodic theme from within the song and evolve that melodic theme into, you know, a kind of a different take, a different perspective on it, or whatever. Um, that's kind of that's what I think guitar solos are for, and I think anything beyond that is just wanking.
I think that's one way to look at it.
Yeah,
The I think a solo can be a solo. Maybe we shouldn't call it a solo. An addition, maybe more, is it is a good tool to go to take the song into a different place sometimes, or one of the ways that it probably should be used. If it's just noodling, it's boring. It sounds great. It used to sound great, you know, when you listen to Slash for the first time, but it's not necessarily does a huge amount. I like it when they take you somewhere, or when they counter the other notes that are being played in the rhythm, or what's happening when they cause tension or some sort of tension release kind of scenario. For me, one of the most interesting leads that I've heard in the last few years are probably on Mastodon stuff. I like the way that they implement some of the stuff in there. Sometimes they just sound like harmonies. Sometimes, because it's Brent that usually plays them.
yeah,
And it's a completely from the sound of it, it's a completely different way of playing the leads than you would traditionally assign to the typical kind of rock leads. I really like that. Now I'm way too shit to do what he does, but I like the idea. Like, I think it's Once Around the Sun, was it Motherlode? Motherlode's got the really long kind of build up, and then the lead comes in and it kind of intensifies it until it just goes back into. To me, those kind of that's where, to me, the leads make sense.
It almost tells a story. Another good example of that is Aesthetics of Hate from Machine Head. Solo on that is amazing. It's all harmony in unison stuff for a while, and then when they start playing together, they break off into solos, but there's no real rhythm guitar. So when one guy does like a shreddy bit, the other guy's playing a couple of notes from that, you know, backing it, and then it goes back and forth. It's like a song within a song.
yeah.
It's so well
Speaking
done.
of, speaking of Slash, I mean, I think if you take uh shit, what's it called? Why can't I remember the title of it? It's off User Illusion 2. Um, it was the last of those stupidly long music videos they did.
Coma.
Sorry?
Coma.
No, no, no. It's that was off one. It's
November
the
Rain?
nope. When you're talking to yourself and nobody's home.
Oh. That is Coma.
No, no, no. It's hang on, I'll tell you.
Coma's still one of my favorite songs. I thought that's a piece of genius, actually.
Yeah, that is a brilliant song. It's estranged.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so there's the line that kind of the song starts, and then there's this kind of just get this very well, I mean it's comparatively simple, this guitar line that da 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 da. That it's a genius guitar line, absolute, but very very simple. But it's like it's barely a guitar. I mean, I suppose it is a guitar solo technically, but it's like what it really is. That you know, it's kind of like the idea of a soul solo. It's more like a melodic passage with it within a song that kind of it enhances the song, it develops the melodic theme of the song. It takes it to a different place, and it also transitions into the next part of the song. And I think that's like, you know, ideally, you know, at this that those are the things that a solo should do, kind of move the song along, introduce new ideas, you know, make the melodic themes resonate. Um, yeah.
the way I think most people think of solos is if you watch that that Jack Black movie, what's it, Rock School or whatever.
School of Rock.
Yeah.
School of Rock. Just noodle on a scale, and you're done. Bend a shitload, play every lick
Yeah.
you know, and you're.
Well, that's it. Yeah. Well, as you said, the Kirk Hammett method, where you just basically play something in a natural minor with a wah-wah pedal on it, just play as fast as you can.
Well, from a songwriting perspective, it wouldn't be out of place to actually discuss. Peter and I have already, I suppose, kind of
Oh Christ!
discussed the new Metallica song.
Yeah. Okay.
One of the best quotes I heard today was from a friend of mine who said, "Kirk Hammett seems like he has his ears painted on these days."
Yeah. I mean, I think the nicest thing I've heard said about it was my guitar player who was messaging me yesterday. He was like, "Have you heard the new Metallica song?" And I hadn't heard it at that point, so I went and listened to it. And he said, "I don't hate it." I'm like, yeah, that's damning with faint praise, isn't it?
That's what I said
mean-
earlier. People are saying, like, some people are saying it's the best thing they've done in 20 years. But they've set the bar so low they've been tripping over the bar for 20 years.
I mean, I didn't like Saint Anger, but there's more interesting things on it than that.
Well, I think the main problem I have with this whole thing, it just sounds like it has all the elements to really please a lot of people, right? But
Yeah.
that's exactly what I don't like about it. It has the classic sing-along chorus, it has the fucking double kick, it has all these elements that kind of cross genres to kind of please everybody, and it's nice and fast and heavy, so it can be kind of called metal, but I don't think it should. But the thing that annoyed me the most was the production is really like over the top, pushed and sanitized and brittle. And I mean,
Yeah.
the bass drum sounds as bad as St. Anger's fucking snare drum. I mean,
Yeah, it's terrible.
it's a shocking
Yeah.
fucking sound. And you think
They've had this problem. They've had this problem since they hooked up with Rick Rubin.
Yeah,
yeah, but I don't understand this bullshit, right? To me, it's the same as like when you watch an advert on TV that's really bad, and you think, well, you have people who thought this up, but then you've got people who filmed it, who wrote it, who scripted it, who edited it, and who gave it the okay. Why is it not at some point in that process where somebody went, whoa, this is shit, try again?
Well, who's going to say that though?
yeah, they're that big. I think they're just surrounded by yes men who are there for the check.
Even their management. I mean, it's like there was this whole bit in the middle of Some Kind of Monster where it's like Cliff Bernstein and fucking what's his name, Peter Mensch came in, and they sit there and they listen to this garbage they've been recording. The only person in that whole documentary who said anything negative to them was Lars's dad, who sat there and they played him some extract from some bullshit they'd farted out and just went, yeah, if it were me, I'd say delete that, you know, because it just doesn't cut it. And it's just like he's the only. Even Bob Rock was like, yeah, all right, whatever. But then when they started doing, Death Magnetic, which to my mind was just a boring record and it sounded bad, and it's like it's this whole. Everyone lauds Rick Rubin as this genius of like, music and production, all this kind of stuff. And perhaps in the 90s that was true. But in my mind, when he hooked up with Metallica, he came to them and he said, well, everyone has been saying for the past 15 years that they want you to play thrash metal again. So why don't you guys play some thrash metal again? And it's like, oh, what a genius for coming up with that idea. And so they did that, but it wasn't very good. It was just a bit sort of naff and boring and just repetitive. And, and obviously I think thrash metal really is a young man's game. And I think they're all, pushing 60 at that point. And it's just like, well, I mean, I'm not dissing them. They're obviously competent. They know what they're doing and all this kind of stuff. And the songs weren't terrible. Exactly like my guitar player said, I don't hate it, but at the same time, it's like, does it get my dick hard in the same way that the Black Album did? No, no, it doesn't. It doesn't even come close to where they were at with like Reload, you know, and that's like, because at least there was some kind of idea going on there. But this is just, it just all feels like just retreaded crap. It just, there's nothing going on in that song. Nothing happening at all.
Yeah.
It's funny you bring up Rick Rubin. He done the last Black Sabbath record as well, and they've since been quite scathing of him. Like, what exactly did he do? Nothing. And they said like he tried to he told Black Sabbath, think back to before you were a metal band. And they're like, what the fuck does that even mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What are you talking about? And he brought in the old amps that they had back in the early days that was unreliable and not that good back then. And they're like, what the fuck is he trying to do? He just pissed them off.
Yeah, but if you, this is a recurring theme, and this is as old as, I think it's probably 10 years old. There are countless interviews with bands that had Rick Rubin, and they all scathed him about not being there, not being interested, you know, listening to the final product and saying this, that, and the other, and then passing off again. I mean, who was it? Seether was one of them. That's why they started producing their own shit. There was quite a few bands. There were quite a few interviews I've seen over the last few years, or write-ups where they were talking about, or bands were talking about their experience with Rick Rubin. I don't know what he did at the end of the day. They just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like with Damien Rice's third record. I'm a huge Damien Rice fan. And so, you know, he had this thing where he had this very acrimonious split with Lisa Hannigan, who did who sung the female vocals on the first two Damien Rice records. And then he went to go and do the third one, and he got Rick Rubin to produce it. And basically, like, all Rick Rubin did was turn up and just tell him to play a bunch of songs he'd already written, and then sort of just waited around while he wrote some new songs, and then sort of vaguely kind of listened to them, and that was it. And then you listen to that third record, and it just isn't anywhere near as good as the first two. It feels really properly like squeezed out. It's just I don't know. I don't like I say, he's been involved in some really great stuff, and you can probably give him the credit for like making Blood Sugar Sex Magic sound as good as it did, you know. But I don't know. I find it very difficult to take him seriously.
But it's probably because he rests on the laurels of the past.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't know why anyone still hires him. He just doesn't seem to do anything. He seems to put the same effort into producing as Metallica do writing.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it's like the story of Enter Sandman is that Lars was listening to a tape that Kirk had recorded in a hotel room late one night or whatever, and he heard the riff, and he was like, okay, it was like, just, okay, to take that bit of the riff like that, play that 3 times, and then play the end of the riff once, and that was the riff for Enter Sandman. And so, but it feels like since then, that's been the basis for all the writing they've done. They've just waited for Kirk to record some bullshit in some hotel room, and then Lars goes, yeah, take a bit of that riff and a bit of that riff, and we'll put it together. It'll be fine. Yeah, do that. It's good.
I don't know.
And it's like...
That sounds like Lars is more of a producer than Rick Rubin is.
There's no way Lars would have time
Lars
for all of that.
He is a producer, you know.
No, there's no way Lars has time to do all that because he's too busy complaining about streaming and downloading and what.
And buying his art and selling his art.
Selling his art, yeah. That was a long time ago. He's got none of that left.
Yeah, shame. I don't know, man. We're sitting here with I've checked today, I think overall just over 40,000 plays on Spotify. And we're criticizing bands that, you know, have got it all.
Well, I mean, I never play that game because it's like Gangnam Style has over 1 billion views on YouTube.
So does that fucking
Wow.
frog.
Yeah, exactly, man. That's the whole thing. It's like numbers like that don't. There's no direct correlation between quality and popularity. There just never has been. There never will be.
I was
Be-
hoping, and I thought I had some hope that the internet and YouTube and the accessibility to get your stuff out would equalize that a bit, but it hasn't really. I think it's improved things a lot, um, but it's come nowhere close. I'll give you an example why, and I think one of the reasons is still marketing and money. Like you open up Spotify, and I will never fucking listen to Taylor Swift, but she's always recommended, recommended, recommended. Like, fuck the algorithm. I'm just gonna recommend this to you because some marketing company put £1 million in my pocket. So now everybody's gonna have to see it. And I find that counterintuitive to what the likes of what Spotify and YouTube can do for music as a whole. If you take the marketing aspect out and you just let the stuff lie there and let people decide what they like and find new stuff, and their band, their own promotional activities and efforts might equalize it a bit, but we're still sitting in the same shit. I mean, there's no
But
reason.
it's just commerce, man. I mean, this is
No,
the thing. So I look
sure.
I look at two things on the internet. Right? I look at guitars and I look at tits. Right, those are the two things I look at on the internet. And yet, like, all the internet ever advertises to me is that I should buy a new widescreen TV to watch football on.
No, tits.
It's like I've never watched a football match in my entire fucking life. I have no interest in it, and
No,
there's no reason
no,
for anyone to suspect.
it's wanting you
You
to
know,
watch tits in high def. That's what it wants.
yeah.
Obviously.
I mean, but that's just commerce. It's just all it is just the numbers game because they know that a good portion of the people they advertise Taylor Swift to are going to listen to Taylor Swift, and they know that if they advertised Deicide on the same level that they advertise Taylor Swift, it'd be like most people would be like, "What is this? I don't like it. I can't." People don't want to be challenged.
See, I would
You
love.
know,
I've always wanted. I wish that it was something that somebody would fund. Is that exact experiment? Now, this side is probably a bit too far on the other side, but something. Dare I say even something of mine or yours? Somebody puts a £2 million advertising budget behind it on streaming servers, Apple, and see where it competes at the end of the day with all the shit that's out there. I wouldn't be surprised if it's on par.
if someone put £2 million behind either of our music, then what would happen is our music would find its audience, which would be a comparatively small audience, but it would still be a substantial enough audience for us to make a living from it. But in terms of the majority of people, I don't think they'd respond to it because I don't think the majority of people really respond to the kind of stuff that we do. I think that's always been true, and I think it's true of like the music that when I think about like the albums that are like my favorite albums, and very few of them are actually albums that I loved on the first listen. Most of the albums that I really love are albums that took me sort of 4 or 5 listens to kind of properly go, you know what, actually this is really good. And then another 4 or 5 listens to go, you know what, this is speaking to me and I love it. And then they've become kind of cornerstones in my cultural experience. Most people, they want something to work immediately, and if it doesn't, they move on. And that's the end of it.
Instant gratification, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And so Taylor Swift, you listen to Shake It Off and you listen to it once and you will learn everything you will ever learn from that song. Just on the first listen.
That's true.
And
that's
not true of Since I've Been Loving You. That is, and I say this bearing in mind that Led Zeppelin at one point were the biggest band in the world. But it's definitely not true of Sound Awake by Carnival. It's definitely not true of Secret South by 16 Horsepower. It's definitely not true of Crack the Sky by Mastodon. It's definitely not true of those albums because, you have to actually put some effort in to get out of them what there is to get out of them, and people don't want to make that effort, you know. And I think that's the reality of commercial music. It's like, not all pop music is bad. You know, a lot of pop music is very, very good, but in the main, I think what becomes very, very popular is usually characterized by the fact that it's immediately and totally accessible and completely without challenge. I think that's it. It's like, you watch Gangnam Style. What I mean, well, okay, maybe that's a bad example because there is actually a bit of a subtext there, and it's a foreign language thing and all that kind of stuff. But it's like Taylor Swift, who you brought up, is actually a really great example, because there's no subtext there. There's no other level. There's no secondary level to anything that she does. It's like she's very good at what she does. No doubt she's a great singer, and her songs are very, very well made and well produced and all that kind of stuff. But I think, it's like, to most people, they like that kind of stuff precisely because it's like they can immediately connect with it, and that's the extent of it. It doesn't cause them to have any reflection. It doesn't make them feel anything beyond the kind of superficial feeling of, I'm listening to music and therefore I'm in a good mood. Having worked in like offices with there's a reason why you work in an office and it's like people want Radio 1 on all the time. They don't want you to put on, oh, here's this great independent record that I've discovered and let's all listen to it and enjoy it together. They don't want that. They just look at you like you're a maniac. They want Radio 1 on because Radio 1 is just a succession of songs that are totally superficial, without any kind of deeper context or content. Nothing to figure out, nothing to understand, no message, no kind of, no themes, no nothing that challenges what people already believe about life and themselves. They don't want to be made to feel any differently than they already feel, other than maybe a little bit more perked up.
Yeah, but
I think
there are also songs that completely challenge that in the past. Even some pop songs that were, I wish I could think of an example now, but they were completely left field, like completely out of the blue, completely different, really strange, and became like big deals, right?
Yeah, like Kate Bush's Wuthering Heights, right?
Yeah, okay, that's a half decent example, yeah, for sure.
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, that's another one.
I
All
feel,
of those things
I
have things
feel
that
about
kind of
Queen as
distinguish
you do
themselves
about
other
Metallica.
than the content of the song. That's the thing. It's like Bohemian Rhapsody was like the first music video, as it were. Got heavy airplay because the BBC pushed it and all that kind of stuff. All of those things found broader audiences because they were given external kind of pushes, which is what I'm saying. Is like, if someone put a load of money behind what we do, it would find an audience and we would enjoy a degree of success because of it. But on its own merit, it's not something that the broader general public would seek to engage with without there being some kind of huge effort to kind of push it on them.
Yeah,
that's my suspicion anyway.
No. I think
you're right.
Unfortunately, right, for sure.
People have more things going on now in their lives as well, and there's more things vying for your attention. So people's attention span.
Take Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, right? So this is an album that came out and did fuck all for 3 years. And then, 2 years, whatever it was. And then there was some kind of deal done between Alan Niven and some guy at MTV to put Welcome to the Jungle on heavy rotation, MTV, put it in front of people who were watching MTV. And then all of a sudden they started doing business. But that was only because there was this push. And now Guns N' Roses are like, legendary rock and roll band. They're right up there. They're Hall of Fame rock and roll band. When people talk about rock and roll, they will always talk about Guns N' Roses as being one of the big influential rock and roll bands of all time, right? But they would have been nothing or no one without that kind of little deal that was done to kind of push that video heavily on TV for them to find an audience, and then it kind of grew out of that. But it's not like it came out and then people went, oh, this resonates with me, blah, blah, that kind of stuff. It took like, this is the thing. I think people don't like things they haven't already heard of. And it's a theory that I have, that one of the most important aspects of becoming successful is to get your name out there, so that when people hear it, when people hear your name, they go, I know that. And they can go, and that will kind of give them an incentive to actually engage with it. The first time people hear your name, and if they haven't heard it before and they don't recognize it, they'll just completely just...
It's funny you say that. I remember a guy saying that very thing to me when I was about 16. I can't even remember the name of the band. This is when you'd borrow CDs off your mates and then copy them onto tape. And I was borrowing this CD off a band I'd seen in Krang. I can't remember the name of it. It was their first album. And he'd borrowed it off someone else. And I asked him, is it any good? And he said to me, not bad considering I haven't heard them before. That really stuck with me. I actually ended up loving the album. I can't even... Deadlights. It was back in a new metal band. One that had one album and then kind of done. But it was actually really good. That's what he actually said to me, and it stuck with me because I couldn't believe someone would think like that. Completely incapable of making his own mind up whether he liked it or not, because enough people didn't tell him it was good.
Yeah.
It's mental. Absolutely crazy way of thinking. And
yeah,
as soon as you said that, it's the first thing I thought of, because that comes to my mind every now and again still. Now I was about 16. Like,
essentially, this is not a discussion about anything else but, the psychology of the masses.
Yeah. People don't want stuff they don't already know about. That's why sequels are so popular. You look at you go to any movie theater and you look at what's on offer, and it's some kind of version of an existing franchise, whether it's the latest Marvel film or a sequel of something, or a remake of something, or the musical version of something, or an adaptation of something. And very rarely you'll get like a completely original film. And usually these days those films are treated like fucking art house films. I must be a cinephile because I'm watching a film that isn't some kind of 19th iteration of whatever superhero film is going on. But it's like the reason why things are so successful is because people, they want the comfort of knowing that what they're about to engage in, they've already established in their minds as being something that they're interested in.
So
people are very uncomfortable with novelty.
So here's something we can do then. We come up with a massively generic name, and we do a test. We do one pop single with all the typical hooks and themes, and see what happens. That's what we should do.
Which of you is going to put the £2 million behind the marketing though? But
this is the point. Is that Peter? You're correct, because the thing is that you can make that song. The trick is to get people to bother to listen to it.
Yeah.
Because the only way you could get people you could make that song to be as, the perfect formula, as it were. But unless it's got Miley Cyrus written on the front cover of it, people won't listen to it. They won't bother. Even if they did listen to it, they won't engage with it because it doesn't have Miley Cyrus written on it.
So we do a Gibson. We call it Miles Cyrus or something. Like, people just get confused because they didn't read properly first time or something. I don't know.
That might work. Why is Ryan Adams famous?
Yeah. Honestly, I literally have exactly the same theory behind that.
Anyway, gents, I might need to call it a night because I'm up.
Yeah, man. Listen, can I quickly just suggest something for next week? Why don't we go for production and mixing next week? Because we've all done it.
Yes.
But our own perspective and how we do things rather than... How's that for a theme?
You two have a lot more experience in that than me. I'm quite new to it, which would be interesting.
Well, I think
as well.
that's why it'd be interesting to hear your perspectives on, I mean, it's like we've been doing it for like 25 years or whatever. If you're new to it, then you might have, to be honest, you might actually be better at it than we are.
I don't know about that.
Because we've got loads of bad habits that you haven't picked up yet.
I probably had less of the struggle because the equipment's easier to use.
The struggle is real.
Yeah. Okay, cool, man. That was fun. So yeah, okay, we'll use that as a theme, and then we'll say adios to everyone. We actually had some people watching, so thanks a lot for tuning in. And
thanks everyone.
Talk to you guys later, huh? Take it easy.
Watching.
Ciao.
See you later. Bye.